Alrighty, chat. Let's get started. So, this feels weird to me. I feel like this is where I want to sit. Maybe I need to move this way. There we go. Okay, that seems better. So welcome, chat. How y'all doing today? Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alo Kanoja. I'm a psychiatrist practicing in Boston. Just a reminder, is that better? I can't tell. All right, whatever. So welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alo Kanoja. I'm a psychiatrist practicing in Boston. Just a reminder that everything we discuss today on stream is intended to be for educational purposes only, and nothing is intended to be taken as medical advice. If y'all have a question or concern that is medical in nature, please go see a licensed professional. So, someone's asking if I think they're pretty. I have no idea, yo. I've never seen you, but I'm sure you're wonderful. So a couple of things. Sorry for the change in setup. You know, on Monday, we had to race across town, and I had to unplug half of my rig to try to stream from a different location because I lost power. Thankfully, that is all over and power has been restored, but I'm just noticing that some of my setup seems off. There is a couple of things to announce. So the first thing is that our creator coaching program, which is designed for Twitch creators, is now actually going to be free for affiliates through the end of the year. So we've seen a lot of good progress and support. We've seen a lot of good, we've been able to support creators really well. And so thankfully, Twitch has decided to expand the program to include affiliates. So if y'all are interested, if you're not a Twitch partner, you're now eligible for the program. It's actually continues to be free, or Twitch is sort of subsidizing the cost, so it won't cost you anything. So huge shout out to Twitch for doing that. So if y'all are if you still haven't made partner, it used to be for the first year of the program that you weren't eligible for it. But, if y'all are an affiliate and you want to become a successful streamer, or you maybe are already a successful streamer but haven't made partner yet, you're dealing with issues of burnout, stress, imposter syndrome, etc., y'all are welcome to sign up for the program. So there are a limited number of spots available, so I'd recommend that you sign up sooner rather than later. And this is going to be sort of like for the month of December, there's a free window for affiliates. The other thing to remember about the program is that we've recently expanded from 8 to 12 sessions based on outcome data. So what we really found is that we started to see really positive gains around the 8-week mark. And for creators who continued for an additional 4 weeks, we saw a lot more in terms of gains. So based on that data, Twitch has been gracious enough to expand the program to 12 weeks instead of 8, which is when we see the best outcomes for creators. Just a quick reminder that the program is conducted by people who have been trained personally by me, and we're actually having additional training this afternoon for the coaches, and I meet with the coaches every week to discuss cases and sort of make sure that the creators in the program are getting the best quality of coaching. So check that out if y'all want to. It's free for affiliates and partners, so take advantage of it. So a couple of other things. We now, based on a lot of requests from our community, have made Dr. K's guide giftable during the holiday season. So if you're, and I also recently discovered that 50% of our audience is over the age of 34. So our demographic has changed quite rapidly. I think we used to be like 95% like 23 or 24-year-old men. And now our demographic has changed drastically in terms of gender. So I think we're somewhere between 15 and 30% women. And we are also like over the age of 34. So I'm not quite sure. And we're getting more, posts from parents. So we'll definitely address one of those today. So I think that's great. But if you have anyone that you want to gift the guide to, you're now able to do that. I think there are going to be a couple of things from the posts today that we're going to review. So we're going to do subreddit review today because my neck is actually killing me. So I'm kind of operating with a debuff. I slept wrong. I don't know if you guys ever do this, but like where you sleep wrong and then like, oh my God, it's like, it feels like a rock. It's like rock hard. Oh my God. Vatas also tend to hold a lot of tension in the necks. So it's rough. So we're going to do, oh man, that feels so good. Got to stretch it. Need more yoga. Absolutely, man. I have not been doing my yoga. So we're going to take a look at a couple of subreddit posts. And yeah, we'll see, we'll see what we can learn today. Okay. Let's get started. Thanks for the subs, by the way. We really appreciate it. All the subs, donos, we really appreciate it. Yoga on stream when? Oh my God. When I'm flexible enough to not embarrass myself. Not really. Yoga's not about flexibility. Common misconception. Maybe we'll do some yoga streams for the holidays. Yeah. Okay. Let's dive in, chat. Oh man, neck hurts so much. Okay. Yoga stream in Santa suit. That sounds good. All right. So we've got some good stuff today, chat. Oh, wait, hold on. There was one that I didn't. Oh, I wonder if I should do more of a lecture on this. Crap. Okay. All right. I can't find it right now, so we'll do it later. Okay. So, our first post today is more empathetic and selfless people always get screwed. Rant. How do you deal with the fact that selfish, narcissistic people always end up on top? How do you deal with conflicts with people like this? I know this is a fact of life, but it frustrates me that the people who are empathetic, who genuinely try to understand others and resolve conflicts, and consider others' well-being and perspective, get screwed over every single time. because whoever is more selfless will fold first in every argument, will make sacrifices in exchange for nothing, while whoever is more self-centered and less considerate will take everything they can get with no remorse, because they care less about you than their capacity to hold a grudge and be a dick in general is so much higher. When they feel attacked, even by the politest suggestion, not even an accusation, they go into fight mode and will do everything to defend themselves and attack you, with no chance of empathy until they win the argument. They will never admit they're wrong or apologize. If you get into an argument with them, based on my experience, your two choices are to try to get them to have a rational conversation from a place of compassion. Pretty much a laughable idea, has never worked. Or to out-attack them in an argument, also never works, because I'm unable to, and they're probably unconsciously used to getting their way. No matter how long you keep pushing forward, they will never listen and just hate you even more. They can make you feel like absolute crap even when you're in the right, but nothing you say will ever make them feel bad for hurting you, because it doesn't even register to them. Even when you finally stop letting them walk all over you and set boundaries, they will see you as the villain. So you're literally fucked no matter what you do. You're guaranteed to feel awful while they get off scot-free. I believe that more empathetic people who try to have logical and rational conversations are objectively better people. But boy, do I wish sometimes I could be on the other side of things and be able to just attack someone remorselessly in arguments. My ability to hold a grudge or to be angry at someone, even who did something truly awful to me, is so low that I just get exhausted after like one day max and try to apologize because I can't handle the arguing. I want nothing more than to get these people to try to see my perspective for a couple of seconds and have a rational conversation from a place of compassion. But it's just never going to happen with this type of person. To be honest, I don't think I've ever won an argument with anyone. Edit, yes, I know this post is somewhat irrational and written in an angry, spiteful tone. I did not expect this many people to read it, but I also know I'm partly to blame, and that just don't interact is the best advice. I'd do that if I could, but the situation I was thinking of while writing this is one this person forced me into, and I cannot leave or avoid them. I was frustrated because I feel powerless. They escalated things more than just a petty work dispute, and I have no choice but to engage and lose. Damn. Okay. So first thing to point out, so this person is like, did a good job of recognizing this is a little bit of a rant. They did a good job of recognizing that it's like written in a spiteful and angry tone. Like that's actually totally fine, right? So I think it's totally fine to be spiteful and angry. And as long as you kind of recognize it, right? You're allowed to rant on our subreddit about whatever you want to. And thankfully, I think people here were really, really nice and offered a lot of good suggestions. So let's kind of start with this person's basic premise, which is how do you deal with the fact that selfish, narcissistic people always end up on top? So let's start with actually the question, do selfish, narcissistic people always end up on top? There's actually been research about this. I wasn't able to find a really good reference in a short time span, but there is actually a lot of research that goes into whether empathy is actually like a vulnerability. And there have been studies that show that empathic people are like more likely to be taken advantage of, and that it actually can like screw you over. Like being empathic is not a straight up advantage. It can actually be a vulnerability that can lead to a greater amount of suffering and essentially like losing more often. So if you look at society, we have a spectrum of, at one end of the spectrum, we have people who are sociopaths, so completely incapable of empathy. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have people who are very, very empathic and oftentimes get taken advantage of. And so is this person's premise that the empathic people always lose, is that premise correct? Well, I wouldn't say that they always lose, and we'll kind of get to that in a second, but I do think there's actually decent evidence that empathy can be seen as a vulnerability, and people who are more empathic than others sometimes get the short end of the stick and will get taken advantage of. So like, I think there's actually like a solid kernel of truth in this person's basic grief, which is that it sucks to be empathic and the narcissists always win. So that being said, I don't really know that it's been my experience that generally speaking, being empathic is a net positive. So the truth is that you probably want to be somewhere in the middle or be able to turn on or off empathy. kind of you should be in control of your empathy and like when to be empathic and when not to be empathic. So I think that one of the trickiest things that empaths deal with, or people who are high on the empathy scale deal with, is how to effectively set boundaries. So there's a tension between compassion and setting a boundary. And so this is also where there's an increasing interest in the domain of EQ, which is emotional quotient, which we'll also be talking about in a couple of the other posts. So there's evidence that shows that like being more emotionally intelligent, which generally speaking narcissists are not very good at, can actually lead to a lot of like positive things. So the ability to understand people, the ability to, understand your own emotions, recognize what you're feeling. So even this person sort of indicates the fact that, like they kind of say in the title, I know this is a rant, I know I'm being irrational. Even that degree of understanding of your own perspective actually over time will correlate with like better outcomes in life because you know what you're feeling. Right, so let's take this on the flip side of your work colleague, apparently, who's very narcissistic, does not take feedback well, and basically proves you wrong anytime you try to make a suggestion. So if this person is not willing to accept suggestions to improve, then chances are they will be far, far less effective over time than you will. Right? So like if the person is not willing to learn from their mistakes because they have a narcissistic defense mechanism, they're just not going to get better at the rate that people who are willing to accept feedback from other people are going to get better. So they're going to stay stagnant. They may have a couple of different moves on their Pokemon, which are really strong, but their Pokemon will never evolve. On the flip side, you may not have the best moves for an individual engagement, but as you continue to like take feedback from people, become self-aware, over time, you will actually win that game. So this is kind of the other thing to kind of point out, which is that you're talking about winning and losing, which I think there's a hefty amount of your own ego in there. So we'll get to that in a second. But what is this person like? What is the cost of victory? Like, what are the spoils of victory and what is the cost of victory? You may feel like this person is winning all the time because they're not willing to accept your feedback. They attack you. There may be a work situation in which they're making you look bad. All that stuff could be true. But I think that over time, this situation that you're describing is going to benefit you more than them. Or it may not be the situation, the person is going to, I would rather take your stats than their stats. And so, I know it sounds kind of weird, but like if you just look at over time, the way that you evolve in this situation, the way that they evolve, like your ability to accept feedback, your ability to over time make the right moves will probably end up with you in a better place than they are. So the next thing that we're going to talk a little bit about is, like this sort of idea that, let me just think about how to say this. So this person is describing a situation in which they are continuously losing battles. And I am basically making the suggestion or hypothesis that you may be losing battles, but over time you will win the war. And why is that? It's because in my experience working with narcissistic people, and I have a lot of experience working with narcissistic people, even though they may win a particular encounter, they're not happy about it. They're certainly not carefree. Because remember that like they're perceiving any kind of polite suggestion as a personal attack. So your desires to help them are actually like incredibly hurtful to them, and they're going through life with a lot of internal pain. So I know that you have this perception that like narcissists are like carefree, but like if they were carefree, they would be able to receive like feedback without going into attack mode. Right? The fact that they're so vulnerable to your attacks, which are polite suggestions that get turned into attacks, and then they go into defensive mode and attack you, actually speaks to a very, very deep insecurity, which they're trying to struggle with all the time. And instead of actually accepting the suggestions that you're making to help them, do better and then be secure because they're actually doing a better job, because they're taking your suggestions to heart, what they end up doing is like defending against your attack, not taking it, continuing to underperform below like what they could be able to, at the level at which they should be able to perform if they accepted feedback. And that then reinforces their insecurity and makes them like more like prickly when it comes to suggestions. So it's absolutely a self-defeating cycle from their perspective as well. I don't know how much consolation that is to you because it seems like, your life kind of sucks in this situation, which I totally get. So the other thing that I kind of want to point out is like there may be plays for you to make here. So the first is that a lot of people will say that, you know, if you're dealing with a narcissist, the best solution is to just leave. And I think that actually is a very good solution. And there are ways that you can even do that in a workplace environment that can be like really, really healthy and positive for you. So I'm going to make a couple of assumptions here. The first is that I'm going to assume that you can't escape this person. The second assumption I'm going to make is that this person actually attacks you or does not accept criticism in a public way that is visible to other people that you work with. Therefore, you have the perception that this person appears more competent than you are. Okay? So let's just assume that they're fighting public battles that make you look bad and make them look competent because you can't outmaneuver them in an argument. So there's actually some interesting suggestions here as well. So this is the kind of situation where if this person is doing this with you, there's a really, really, really good chance they're doing it with other people. So if this person is narcissistic, it's kind of like, you know, they're not just going to be narcissistic with you. They're going to be narcissistic with everyone. They're going to be competitive with everyone. And this is where we're going to be a little bit sneaky and use that against them. So this is where you be sneaky. Don't argue with them. Just start having private conversations with your fellow coworkers or even your boss and sort of point out this person's behavior to other people. You're going to kind of shit talk them. You're going to go to your boss and you're going to say, hey, I don't know if you noticed what happened in the meeting. I'm a little bit curious. What was your perception of what happened in today's meeting? And the boss may say, oh, you lost an argument. Absolutely talk shit behind their back. So, but that's not what the boss is going to say. They're going to notice that, oh, like this person, like, you know, you'd be surprised at how sensitive other people are to narcissistic attacks. Like, people are not going to think that you're just losing arguments right and left. They're probably going to realize that this person is kind of like not the easiest to work with. Then you're going to go to your boss and you're going to say, yeah, so, you know, I noticed that this person, I made this suggestion because, and this is where you need to frame things for the benefit of the company or your job. So I noticed that this person, for example, like doesn't ever shred medical information. And I know that at this hospital, we are committed to protecting patient privacy, which is why I sort of suggested and even tried to like point out to them that I can get them a shredder if that's a problem. I'm happy to try to make things convenient and easy for them. But they seemed to like shut down the suggestion and felt like very personally attacked. I'm not sure how to protect patient privacy when I'm working with someone who is like so against this kind of goal and is taking things personally. Go to your boss, say this to them and say, can you please help me understand like how I should work with this person? Like, because I'm really struggling. Go to your coworkers and you can also mention to them, hey, I'm really having difficulty working with this person. I'm curious, have you had difficulty? Do you have any suggestions? And this is really great because like over time, what's going to happen is one of two things is going to happen. It's kind of a win-win here, okay? One is that they say, yeah, I really have difficulty dealing with this person too. They're a complete asshole. And then you guys laugh about that, commiserate about that. The next time that they attack you in a meeting, you're going to make eye contact with your colleague that you had the conversation with, and you're going to roll your eyes, which is going to piss off the narcissistic person because they're going to recognize that that's something that is disrespectful. And then they will attack you further. And then you're just going to be calm and say, I'm a little bit confused. Is something wrong? And the more that you remain neutral, the more that you don't engage with them, the more they're going to implode and you're just going to be sitting there. And like when you get the opportunity, you're just going to make eye contact with people around the room. And if you really want to go for the sucker punch, you can, even in the middle of the meeting, turn to your boss and say, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I'm trying to be respectful and I haven't even said anything. And this person, like in a public meeting, in front of your boss, say, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I'm having difficulty learning how to like communicate with this person in a professional manner. Ask your boss then and there, do you have any suggestions? Because I'd love to try to improve this situation. Publicly, in the room, call attention to it if you really want to do that. And you will completely knock them flat on their feet, right? Because what does anyone say at that point? Like, what does your boss say? Does your boss say, oh, yeah, this is your fault because your narcissistic colleague is going constantly on the attack? Or your narcissistic colleague is like, yeah, you should do this and you should do this and you should do this and you should do this. And then you kind of turn to them and you say, okay, thank you for the feedback. I do those things. I've spoken with you in a respectful tone. I haven't done anything to attack you. I don't know where this is coming from. And like, just the narcissistic person will implode, and just let him implode. It's okay. Like, this is the key thing you've got to understand. If you've got high EQ and someone is narcissistic and can't control their reactions, you can bait them if you really want to. So you can do that, right? So like, I'm not saying that you actually do all of those things, but you should absolutely have a conversation with your boss where you think a little bit about, what your goals at this job are, how this person is making it difficult. And if you are, not only is your colleague not accepting feedback, you are openly asking for feedback. You are openly going to your boss and other people and saying, hey, I'm trying to make this situation work. Please help me. And the more that you kind of do that, like, how can you be blamed for that, right? Like, you can't really be blamed for that. And so, like, this is the kind of thing where, people think that narcissists win in these sorts of situations. And that's simply because we're never taught, like, how to play the game against narcissists. So they, like, pull you into a particular dynamic that is beneficial for them. And as long as you adopt a defeatist attitude, and we're going to kind of go here real quick, right? Because I think this is the problem. I have no choice but to engage and lose. Yeah, so like, take a page from Sun Tzu's Art of War. Like, don't fight the battle that you're going to lose. Fight the battle that you're going to win. And so that can be cultivating support from other colleagues. It can be talking to your boss. You're not trying to actually like destroy this person, right? It's not malice that I'm suggesting. It's just genuinely like, how do you work with this person? You find the other people in the office that you can positively work with, the people that find this person annoying. You talk to your boss so that you're kind of signal to your boss, hey, I'm trying to make this happen. It's totally fine. And then the other thing that you can start doing is getting into a position of leaving. And then once you may not be able to leave right away, but chances are, over time, you will have some degree of freedom, right? And this is where you may think you're not able to leave, but really what's stopping you. So I'd polish up your resume, start applying to other places, and you can also circle back with your boss after a couple months and say, hey, this like situation is really not working well for me. I'm trying to make things work with this person, and I'm not so sure that I want to stick around. And I know a lot of people will say, like, don't let your boss know like what you're thinking. There's a lot of this in the anti-work kind of subreddit movement, but I think there are good bosses out there, and you have to figure out, is your boss a good boss or not a good boss? Then circle back with your boss and just say like, hey, I don't really, I'm trying to do a good job here, but I find it very difficult to work with this person. And so, I'm not saying that, they need to go, but I just wanted to let you know that I'm like seriously considering moving on. And, just ask your boss, what do you think about that? Right? So like, let them know and just like ask for their opinion. And they say, yeah, if you're really thinking about moving on, like, you should move on. And then cool. So now you understand, right? Then what you do is you tell your coworkers that you formed somewhat of an alliance with, and you can say, hey, I just wanted to let y'all know I was thinking about leaving because I have difficulty working with this person. I talked to boss about it. They thought it may be a good idea if I leave. If y'all are also interested in leaving or have thought about it, I'd love to have a conversation with you. And then you start looking for other jobs, because the truth of the matter is that narcissists drive people away. And so here's the long-term victory plan for empaths versus narcissists. In this world, there are givers and takers. And this sort of situation, you're screwed if you're a giver with a taker. But if two givers meet together and they're able to form some kind of relationship, their relationship will be superior to two takers. So giver versus taker, taker wins, giver loses. Taker versus taker, it's kind of like even. And giver plus giver is also even, but it tends to be superior to taker plus taker. So over time, what you want to do is cultivate the right kinds of people in your life and set boundaries. And this is where, like, you may think, oh my God, the narcissist won because I left. And like, that's all ego. Like, your ego is absolutely like active here too. And if you guys want to see this, let's pretend for a moment that this person is narcissist. How do you deal with the fact that selfish, narcissistic people always end up on top? This is an incredibly narcissistic question, right? Oh, like, the world is rigged against me, and even though I am a good person, the rest of the world is crap. It frustrates me that the good people are the ones that get screwed, who genuinely try to understand and resolve other conflicts and consider other people's well-being, get screwed over every single time. Such a narcissistic statement. You guys get this? Right? Like, this is exactly what a narcissist would post. So, like, this is the kind of, I'm not calling this person a narcissist. I don't think they are. I think this is, I think they're demonstrating a lot of good insight, which you would not see from a narcissist. So, like, this stuff over here, they're kind of acknowledging that, like, I recognize what I'm saying is rational. Narcissists don't believe that, right? They believe they are rational. And it's written in an angry, spiteful tone. I was frustrated because I feel powerless. This is not something a narcissist would say. My point is that remember that narcissism is a defense mechanism. It is a function of the ego, and the ego arises anytime we get attacked, right? So this is all, I'm not going to go into all the detail here, but if you guys check out the Vedic psychology lecture in Dr. K's guide, you will see like this, all of this will be laid out. If you guys have a problem with your ego, if this happens to you, where when you feel hurt, you start to become narcissistic. If you want to understand this, it's laid out really well there, so definitely check that out. But we can definitely see the narcissistic defense even here, right? So just to kind of summarize, this is a situation where over time, if you are an empathic person, you will actually there is truth that if you are an empathic person, you will be taken advantage of by people who are narcissistic. This is absolutely true. And so over time, what you want to do is just cultivate the right kinds of relationships, learn to set healthy boundaries, right? And this is the kind of thing where, like, I'm not suggesting you engage with this person. You don't even try to make them understand, because they've demonstrated to you time and time and time again that they are not willing to listen. So you should just stop. Just go to everyone else. And then, like, over time, as you activate their narcissistic defense mechanism, you are just going to double down in terms of maneuvering around them. And then, like, the more upset they get, they may even come at you like hard. They may try to sabotage you or something like that. So be careful. But I think it's totally fine to, not do anything with them publicly. Just go to your different colleagues, then you can decide how sadistic you want to be and how much you want to punish them. And if you want to give in to that hungry beast inside you that feels wronged, you can roll your eyes, make contact in a public meeting, call them out, and be nothing but professional and work towards, the company's goals. And then they're gonna go insane. They're gonna explode. It's totally fine. You can do that if you want to. I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't recommend it. I don't think that that's accumulating some amount of negative karma, even if it's very, very satisfying. So I think that it's always better to not attack other people, even if you can demolish them. Right? So, like, that's just not what I think you should do. So over time, what you want to be really careful about is cultivating the right kind of relationships. And so this particular job may not have a boss that is sympathetic to you, may not have coworkers that are sympathetic to you. This particular job may have a boss who says, oh, they're super productive, so we're going to tolerate their bad behavior, which is why you need to move firms, right? Because there are going to be places where that kind of stuff isn't tolerated. There are going to be places where bosses will fire the bad apple no matter how productive they are. And so we see this a lot. Like, I think, for example, in investment banking, there's like a heavy, heavy bias towards, like, it doesn't matter how you act, it just matters how well you work. And so you can be kind of an asshole. And there's a perception that's what all investment banks are like. The good news is that's actually changing quite rapidly. And now there are a lot of people who are starting to value, like work-life balance and positive environments. And they're attracting people and have actually far lower turnover. This is the big thing that I was working with someone very high up in an investment bank. And I was trying to advocate for them to create a better corporate culture. And the reason why is because their turnover is ridiculously high. Like, you guys can be signing deals right and left, but you're losing out on so many more deals because your turnover is through the roof. And the reason your turnover is through the roof is because you have a prestigious name. People come here and the nice ones leave, like the team players leave, and then you're left with a bunch of sharks. And that's why you get problems at the lowest levels, the middle levels, and hard level. It's a shark culture. So over time, I'm not saying you have to leave your job now, but I think you can definitely maneuver to dismantle this person if you really want to. And also, if the dismantling doesn't work, you move to a place where there are other people who are more empathic and supportive. Make sense? By the way, is this kind of work stuff? Is this helpful for y'all? Do you guys want to talk more about this? Okay. I know it's not about like anxiety. So this is the kind of thing where I know like sometimes when you guys post this thing and you're like, oh, Dr. K is going to talk about psychology. Like, sure, sort of, but weaponized psychology, chat. Okay. All right. Okay. My IQ is below average. What are some of the ways I can live a successful and meaningful life? Hello, Dr. K. I'm a young adult male and I'm currently going through an existential crisis where I believe that I am not going to make it in life. I don't have any skills or talents that makes me unique in the direction of my life is going to a complete disaster. The direction of my life is going to a complete disaster and nothing can be done. I'm in college studying business that can't get me anywhere. I'm still living with my parents because I don't have stable income to survive on. I can't do basic tasks such as using the cash register at work, folding clothes, sweeping, and cleaning my house. There's so many tasks that I can't do right. I can't pay attention in my college classes. I take longer to understand things more than others, and I struggle to think fast. It's horrible because my parents constantly put me down and compare me to my peers who are doctors, lawyers, and software engineers, making far more than I do. The huge issue that's affecting me is my low IQ. I took an IQ test when I was in school by the psychologist, and I scored around 80, which is exactly below average. After this, the psychologist even felt pity for me and told me to my face that I won't amount to anything in life. I swear to God that I am probably the dumbest to walk this earth. I am extremely unsure of how I will survive in this world, as that if your IQ is below 87, you can't work any type of job to survive. This seems embarrassing because it's difficult when I want to move out. When I want to move out my parents' house, I'm not financially stable to do it. I get depressed every day knowing that I can't prove myself to others. My dreams of being a physicist or an investment banker, please don't laugh, are not going to happen because of this curse. I was thinking about jumping off a building one day because I can't take this shit anymore. So, the first point, right, is if you're really considering, if you're having thoughts of hurting yourself or jumping off of a building, you may want to actually seek professional help, right? So like this is something, and we'll talk about why that may be particularly important for this person. So what we're going to actually do is take a step back and look at, let's talk about a couple things, okay? So we're going to talk about IQ, we're going to talk about this person's situation, and we're going to talk a little bit about if your IQ is below average, can you have a successful and meaningful life? Spoiler alert, my answer is going to be yes. But it is my job to convince you of that, right? I'm not necessarily correct. It may not be possible. So let's just try to be as objective as we can and kind of think through it. Okay? So let's start with this. What is a successful and meaningful life? How do we define that? Right? So that's the first question, is like, what is a successful and meaningful life? Can anyone give me an answer? What do y'all think? How do you determine what a success? I don't know. Right? So, okay, so like people are sort of saying, like, let's just think through this, right? So if your goal is to have a successful and meaningful life, which I have no, I think that's wonderful that you want that. Let's first start by like understanding what it is that you're shooting towards. Okay? So, let's think about it. Okay, what is... Right? So like, I don't know. So people are saying income. Okay? Being productive. Being happy. And so this is kind of interesting, but like having your needs met. Excellent. Right? So this all like is good. Fulfillment. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and call an audible here. And I'm going to move this one up here because then like the next question is like, what is fulfillment, right? Chat? It's like, what does that even mean? So now the next question is, so if you want to determine whether you can have a successful or meaningful life, the next thing that we need to do is sort of try to figure out what are the things that correlate with with this, right? So then the next question is, does IQ somehow correlate with these things? Okay. So like, I think we can clearly say that probably like IQ and income is going to be like correlated. But I don't know that IQ and productivity, happy, or getting your needs met is necessarily correlated. Maybe because of this, we can also say that needs met in terms of financial. So maybe your financial needs can be met this way. But once again, so I say this as a psychiatrist who's worked with many, many people who are like very narcissistic and very successful, i.e. investment bankers. I can pretty much tell you that, like, you know, sure, they have the income and they may be sort of productive, but they certainly don't feel that way oftentimes. They work a lot, but they don't really feel productive because all they're doing is editing PowerPoints. I kid you not. Like, their job is like, okay, they get a PowerPoint at midnight and their partner says, hey, I need this by 6 a.m. Make these changes. So they spend 6 hours running models, making these changes to a 35 slide deck. And they make the changes and they send it out to the whole team. The other partner on the team says, hey, these changes are bad. I need you to make these changes. I need you to revert back to what we had before. And so like, it's just like constantly editing slide decks to meet the preferences and whims of a particular person. So I certainly will attest to the fact that many of them are not happy. They don't feel fulfilled. They don't have meaning. They certainly have income, but they pay the price of fulfillment, success, meaning, and happiness. That's what they pay for money, right? So that's what they get money, and then they don't have those other things. So I'm not really sure that, you know, aside from income, IQ is necessarily correlated with like other things. So that's the first thing. So you may not be screwed in life just because you have a low IQ. Now let's kind of also kind of look at things a little bit more objectively and sort of try to understand, okay, like what's up with IQ? So here's what we need to understand about IQ. So the median IQ is about 100. And one standard deviation, which is about 70% of people, are between 85 and 115. So one standard deviation is about 15. So this is where most people live. Below 85, we start to get to, you know, there's about 15% that are less than this, and 15% over here that are greater than this, right? And so 80 is like right over here. And so even if you're below average on IQ, it doesn't mean that you're like devastatingly screwed. So that, you know, the number at which we really kind of think about intellectual disability is actually like below 70. So once you cross 70, because remember, one standard deviation is 15, right? So a second standard deviation is 70. So this is where you start to get into the mild intellectual disability range. And this is where you may not really be able to, for example, be a physicist. I don't know if someone with a IQ of less than 70 can be a physicist. I just don't know. I'm not saying that they can't. But in this 70 to 85 range, I personally don't think that this person is quite as screwed as they think they are. So you can still like hold a normal job. It may take you longer to learn particular things. There are lots of different jobs where you don't necessarily need to have a high IQ to be successful. And so let's kind of flip back to the post for a second and take a look at, you know, what's going on here. So I suspect that a lot of this person's problems are not due to the low IQ. This is not what's dooming them. They are doomed, but what they're doomed by is their belief of their own success or their inability to become successful. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about this. So like this person has a problem of, if you read this post, it can be summarized with this statement: I will fail. Okay, so let's just kind of look through this for a second. So I'm currently going through an existential crisis where I believe I am not going to make it in life. Okay, that's the first thing they say. Not going to make it. Okay, and then I don't have any skills or talents. No skills or talents. So they believe this, right? The direction of my life is complete disaster. And I'm in college studying business that can't get me anywhere, not going anywhere. right? And then I want to fast forward. So they're, they talk about all the things that they have difficulty doing. Okay, so can't perform basic tasks, can't do basics. Parents constantly put me down. Okay. And then can't prove myself. So we're going to jump. There's the IQ paragraph and then can't prove myself. So we're going to analyze what this person is saying, okay? And then we're going to talk about dreams. So these are the things that I want y'all to take away, okay? So they're not going to make it. They have no skills or talents. Their life is a complete disaster. They're not going anywhere. They can't do basic tasks. Their parents constantly put them down. You can't prove yourself, and you have particular dreams. So you may say like, wow, that sounds kind of rough. So here are the points, right? So this is what is in the post. And now we're going to kind of examine it. So our examination is going to be here. So it starts with this idea that I will fail. Okay? Now this is really important because the I will fail idea affects us in two ways. So one is it creates something called a nocebo effect. So we're going to talk a little bit about psychology and science. So there is something called the placebo effect, which is that if someone believes that a medication will work, it is more likely to work. So you can even give someone who's got like diabetes, let's say a sugar pill, the irony. And the irony is that if they believe that the medication will lower their blood sugar, even though it's a sugar pill, if they believe it'll lower their blood sugar, it actually lowers their blood sugar some. That's called the placebo effect. Now, at the opposite end of the placebo effect is called the nocebo effect. And I see this a lot in psychiatry. So sometimes I'll get people who come into my office and they'll say, medication has never worked for me. Medication does not work. So they're coming into my office with a nocebo effect. And even the thought that medication never works for me is going to actually affect the efficacy of medication. So if you go through your life thinking you will fail, there's actually scientific data to back this up. It's not just like a psychological thing. It's like it's even like a neuroscientific thing, right? So this is important to understand that this works for physical medicines. So forget about psychology for a second. We're talking about diabetes levels, cholesterol levels, response to chemotherapy and cancer treatment, that the nocebo effect is actually active in all divisions of medicine. So it's not just psychological, it's physiological. So what this sort of means is that you actually, if you believe you're going to fail, you are actually more likely to fail. And I don't just mean psychologically. It's not like, oh, I believe I'm going to fail, therefore I'm not going to try as hard, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not talking about the psychological stuff. I mean like physiologically, your body is prepped to try to create failure. So second thing, and this is going to be a little bit more psychological or neuroscientific, has to do with our success calculation. So our brain has this circuit that performs success calculations. So it basically performs this calculation that sort of determines motivation and behavior. Okay, so let me give you guys an example. So this morning, I did not wake up, go out to my garage, grab a shovel, and start digging for buried treasure. Why did I not do that? Because my brain performed a calculation that was like, hey, by the way, if you dig for buried treasure, you're probably not going to find it, so there's no point in trying. Okay? Now, we also see this kind of motivational stuff happen with people who have difficulty with dating. So people who believe that they are going to be alone forever will be not motivated to date, or it'll be very difficult for them to date because their brain is literally making a calculation that is like likelihood of success is like a big part of the calculation. And so if your likelihood of success is very, very low because you believe you will fail, then your motivation is going to like be very, very low. Okay? So now what we sort of get is like a sort of a vicious cycle, okay? Where I will fail, we've got the nocebo effect, success calculation is low, decreased motivation. Therefore, these two things are going to kind of combine and result in a higher percent. It's a percent sign, just poorly drawn. Let me try to draw it again. An increased percentage of failure, right? And so the more we fail, the more we get evidence that I will fail. And the stronger this gets, this forms a feedback loop, goes over here. This becomes stronger. This becomes stronger. This becomes stronger. Motivation actually goes down. So let's actually do this, right? Motivation decreases. And then these things in turn are going to increase our chance of failure, which will in turn increase the evidence that I will fail, which will then go back around and feed into this. Okay? And this is how we see. Now I want you guys to look at all these statements. Where do you think these statements came from? Well, actually, let's stop here for a second. Okay? Where did these statements come from? These statements come from going through this cycle over and over and over again. It has nothing to do with IQ. So like IQ may actually result in a greater chance, having a lower IQ may have something to do with a greater chance of failure. But this degree of certainty about failure, right? So if you had a confident person with low IQ, and I've met with those people, I know people like that, like I have friends like that. You know, they just sort of like understand the limits of their ability, but they are actually like sort of chilling in life, right? They're kind of chilling. They're like, they have their job. They're not actually super ambitious, or sometimes they actually are super ambitious and can be very, very good at stuff. So for example, I have a friend who's a chef who probably has like a below average IQ. They've been tested as well. We're going to talk about testing in a second. But you know, so they tested below average, and they just went to culinary school, and they're doing fine in life. They're actually like pretty ambitious. They're pretty productive. They're not happy, but for reasons that I think are unrelated to their IQ or their professional success. So there are a lot of professions out there that don't require a high IQ, that you can also still be like very reliable, very successful. I think that there are a lot of positions that people with higher IQ may find boring, that people with lower IQ may be better suited for. So there may be a certain amount of like, you know, day in and day out kind of stuff, that like organizing stuff, like those kinds of things, jobs like being a personal assistant. There's a lot of stuff out there that people with low IQ may be better suited towards. Now, let's remember that this person wants to be a physicist or an investment banker. So we don't want to alter their dreams based on, hey, you can't be a physicist or an investment banker. You need to be a personal assistant or a chef. Like, we don't want to say that to this person. That's not what I'm saying. Although I suspect that based on their attitude, they're interpreting things that way. So like, let's look at this. After this, the psychologist even felt pity for me and told me to my face that I won't amount to anything in life. I highly, highly, highly doubt this statement. The psychologist would have to be the worst psychologist on the planet to tell you to your face that I won't amount to anything. Hey, you're not going to amount to anything in life. They may have said, hey, it may be hard for you to become an investment banker or physicist. They may have said something like that. But given this attitude, what the psychologist said may be interpreted in this way. Given your attitude, you may have even interpreted what I said as, hey, you can never become a physicist or an investment banker, which I didn't say that. Right? You may be a great physicist or investment banker. I don't know. Let's finish kind of analyzing this, okay? So these statements come from this cycle. And the question is, okay, so like if this is a cycle, where does it start? Here's where it starts. Right? So if your parents, because this is the thing, I don't think they just started comparing you to people who are doctors and lawyers like just over the last year. Chances are, as you were growing up, your parents started by putting you down a lot. They made lots of comparisons. They sort of didn't accept you for who you are and wanted you to be something else. So as parents, parental comparison is where the cycle starts. Hate to blame the parents. So this is just a hypothesis. Maybe your parents were wonderful. Who knows? I'm not saying they aren't wonderful, but if they compare you a lot, this is where the kind of cycle starts, right? Because what they're always doing, no matter how hard you succeed with parental comparison, let's look at it this way, okay? So they say, why can't you, okay, so they'll say, here's you, here's someone else. So why did you get a C? Someone else got a B, right? Why can't you be like this person? This person gets Bs. If you get a B, Why didn't you get an A? Right? Why are you studying business? This person is pre-med. You're a doctor? Why didn't you go to Harvard? Right? If you go to Harvard, why the fuck are you becoming a psychiatrist? Right? It's such a waste of your talents. You're too smart to be a psychiatrist. You should do something that's more competitive, like cardiology. My point is that IQ doesn't really determine this. It's the parental comparison. Right? So the parental comparison is where this starts. And no matter what you accomplish, they're always comparing you to someone better. It doesn't really matter how good you are, right? Like, it doesn't matter. If parents are going to compare, if they're not going to accept you for who you are, like, they're going to compare you. And then the conclusion from all of this is you're not good enough. And then it's a very short hop, skip, and a jump to you will fail. And thus the cycle begins. Okay? So this is the kind of thing where I think that what's holding this person back is not actually their IQ, although I'm not disputing that, I don't know that like someone with an 80 IQ, I don't know their ability to become a physicist. I just don't know. But what I do think may be very, very possible is, for example, if you love physics and like you understand physics, like let's say that, how can I say this? Sometimes the worst students make the best teachers. So like, if it's hard for you to understand things and you can get to that place of understanding, you may actually be a far better teacher than someone with a very high IQ. And the reason for that is because people with the high IQ they can skip all the middle steps. But if you've got a low IQ, you may learn things slower, but you learn all the middle steps, and you may actually be a better teacher. So I know it sounds kind of weird, but like the reason that I'm really good at teaching motivation and understanding motivation is because I suck at it. Like my internal motivational drive is very, very low. And oddly enough, that's actually like an advantage in a bizarre situation. Right? Because like now I understand, like I couldn't take motivation for granted. It wasn't easy for me. It was so hard all the time. And so that's what actually makes me like an effective teacher on motivation, because I can't take any of it for granted. I'm just assuming for a moment that I'm an effective teacher on motivation, which I may not be. So the last thing that I want to point out is this statement of can't prove myself. So if you want to understand what leads you to being fulfilled and meaning, if you're trying to prove yourself to other people, this is never going to happen. So if you want to understand, like, okay, how do you become successful? Here's what it is. You start by understanding, okay, like, here's my IQ, totally fine. You understand what are the things outside of my IQ that are holding me back, because it's not just IQ. Right? It's this belief that you're going to fail. To understand, okay, this belief came from somewhere. So this is something that you may want to work with a therapist, right? Not only for the suicidality, but also like for this kind of stuff. Like, I'm not saying go to a therapist just so you don't kill yourself. I'm saying go to a therapist because, first of all, suicide is scary and you shouldn't kill yourself. And the reason you shouldn't kill yourself is because I don't agree with this premise. And a therapist can help you change this. They can help you do this. And then suddenly all of this changes, right? Then you're harnessing placebo instead of nocebo. And then suddenly, like, things that even have no biological effect are starting to work for you. So you can absolutely do that. The other thing that I just want to point out is IQ tests. I don't know exactly what the reliability of the IQ test is, but if you're at 80 and you got tested once, you need to be a little bit careful, because I do believe that IQ tests are affected or confounded by different things like mood or, stuff like depression. So depending on when you took it, there may be like things that negatively impact the reliability of the IQ test. So I also don't know like what the reliability between two tests is. So for example, like, tests just have different reliability. So if you get tested twice, you may discover that you're actually like 90 the second time, right? There's probably some amount of like movement in terms of reliability. Now, generally speaking, IQ tests should control for things like age or like level of education. I think they try to control for those things, but there may be confounding variables. So I don't know how to say this, but like an IQ test is not like a biopsy, right? It's a test that tries to approximate your intelligence. The last thing is that IQ tests don't really look at EQ. So there are some people that I know, for example, that are like average or even below average IQ, but are actually super high in the EQ domain. And this could be you never know. And if you're high in the EQ domain, you can actually be very, very successful and offer a lot of value to places. So a good example of this is kind of interesting, but if you look at investment banking, the people who are actually at the top, I think, have an EQ greater than IQ situation. So the people who have the highest IQ are the ones that are best at running models, creating models, doing a lot of like the technical work. But actually, if you want to really succeed at the highest levels of investment banking, it's about relationships and relationship building. It's about bringing the business in the door. So IQ is necessary for executing the business. EQ is necessary for bringing the business in the door. Okay, so you may not be screwed. Last thing is that, I'd say that if you're thinking about the dreams, right? So this person dreams of being a physicist or an investment banker, which is totally fine. You're allowed to have your dreams, but I would be really curious, like I'm telling you to be curious about where that dream comes from. What is it like? Because like, what do you know about investment banking or being a physicist? Why does that appeal to you? Why is that your dream? And chances are you have a particular vision of what that looks like, which may not actually be a physicist or investment banker. But once you understand what appeals to you about the investment banker or being a physicist, you may be able to duplicate or satisfy those needs in an alternate profession. So a lot of people will have fantasies of like, oh, I want to be this because if I am this, then I will be happy. But what they're really chasing is what they think that thing is. So we see this a lot in terms of like relationships too, where sometimes you'll have like a vision of a person and you'll be like, oh, I really want to love that. I want to be dating that person, but you don't really know who that person is. And reality is very different from what fantasy you create in your mind. So it's okay to have dreams. I'm not saying abandon your dreams because you tested low on your IQ. By all means, go for it. Like if you want to study business, like study business and then apply for a job in an investment bank. By all means, go for it. But I'd also like encourage you to be curious about what does it mean to you to be in investment banking? What is the kind of, how would that fulfill you? And once you understand what that need is, you may be able to fulfill it outside of investment banking, which is how you get meaning and fulfillment. Okay? All right. Okay. Oh, this one's interesting. Oh, whoops. Okay. So, I'm a former incel, 32M, okay, who had sex for the first time today and was grossed out. After a 2-year self-improvement journey, I was able to get a woman to sleep with me on our 5th date. Prior to sex, she said she might even become my girlfriend if we continue to get along and bond with each other. Later that evening, we hooked up. I'm not sure what I was expecting to feel, but my eggplant felt really weird inside. I didn't bother to finish because I lost my boner, got a little queasy, and just said I wasn't ready after all. She knew my situation, so she was supportive and hugged me. I have big fingers and I play guitar, so I was able to get her off using my hands. Perhaps that's why we're meeting again this Tuesday. She said she still might become my girlfriend. Am I actually some sort of asexual? Have I damaged my eggplant from 18 years of jerking off? I can easily jerk off thinking of this girl, so I know the plumbing works. By the way, I successfully completed No Nut November in an attempt to escape porn addiction and be interested in real sex. So I am sad that I didn't succeed when the time came. Or the time didn't come. Edit. During my lonely years, I developed some disturbing porn fetishes. That got really bad after a knee surgery that left me laid up in bed for weeks. Hitchhiking to Squirt City 3 times a day. That's one of the reasons why I did No Nut November. I worry that the porn preferences might be corrupting my normal sexual appetite. Okay, so apologies for the trolling comment. So I think this is a really excellent post because I think it highlights a couple of things. The first is that, incels believe, just like we were saying, they have this like fantasy of what sex is like, right? And they think like, oh, if I can just get a woman to sleep with me, I will no longer be an incel and everything will be amazing, right? So they sort of have this idea that if you have sex a single time, then you are like no longer the incel and everything for you is like golden after that. You become one with the Chads. Like you graduate from incel to Chad, and once you graduate from incel to Chad, then like you're totally fine and everything is super easy for you. And I think this is the unfortunate thing is they're wrong about that, and you can be happy as an incel, sort of. Or let me put it this way. Our society places a bizarre value on sex, right? And we think that once you have sex, you've crossed some sort of threshold to where there's like, you're in the promised land where everything, you're confident and rich and powerful and all these other things. But that's just not how it is, right? So, and I think this is a really great post because it illustrates the simple truth of like how complicated sex is and how just getting laid is not going to fix all your problems, okay? So let's talk about this for a second. So this is going to be a little bit more graphic, but I think it's really, really important to understand, like sex and what it means to people and how to get out of the situation. This is unfortunately a situation, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. I've worked with a fair number of people who are sort of in this situation, and I've also helped them get out of the situation. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about how to deal with this. So let's start off by sort of thinking through like the key points of this person's post. So the first is that they are a former incel. So the first is that they identified with being an incel. Second thing is they have worked on themselves for 2 years, completed No Nut November, went like Chad mode, Sigma male, right? And then like managed to start dating and were able to engage in a sexual relationship with a partner. I think it's a woman, right? Saying girlfriend, so let's assume woman. The other thing that I want to tell this person is like, this woman is worth her weight in gold, right? So like, this is just something I want to say. Like the ability to understand where you're coming from, be emotionally available for you, and sort of like be patient with you as you're going through this journey is like amazing. You really got lucky because there are many people out there who may not be as willing to like hold your hand through this journey, which is exactly what it's going to be. It's going to be a journey. So now what we're going to do is talk a little bit about sex and how we envision sex. So we envision sex as like some sort of like milestone where it's like once you have it, like it is a thing, and then you are like, everyone loves having sex. Sex is fantastic. We also think that it's great every single time. Like, man, I got laid. It was so awesome, dude. Like, oh my God. Like, oh man, getting laid. Like, oh my God, laid. So we definitely romanticize the idea of sex. We also romanticize the idea of both being a virgin and no longer being a virgin, right? We attach all kinds of different like myths and other kinds of like things to sex. So let's just kind of quickly talk about the myths of sex. Let me see if okay. It's funny, I was actually talking about this earlier. So let's talk about the way that we romanticize and mythologize sex, okay? So, all right, so myth number 1. The first time you do it, it's gonna be amazing. Oftentimes not true. I think especially, I think women have this experience more often than men. Oh, wait, we're not, you guys can see, okay. The myths of sex. So the first time you do it, it's going to be amazing. Myth number 2, every time you do it, it's going to be amazing. Also not true. Okay? So the truth is that sex is just like anything else. So I'd say it's like almost like cooking, where, you can cook an amazing meal and it can be super, super delicious. But the first time you cook something, it's probably not going to be like that great, right? And I think especially I've had this experience more with women that I've worked with, where oftentimes the first time they have sex, it's like painful, somewhat pleasurable. Oftentimes the first time that women have sex, especially if it's like teenagers, for example, the person they're having sex with may not know exactly how to bring them to orgasm because it's like not quite as intuitive for women as it is with men. So, there's this idea that the first time you have sex, it's supposed to be like this amazing thing, right? So also like in cultures like the incel culture, like they will mythologize and kind of fantasize about what this first sexual experience is. Whereas the truth of the matter is, for many people, the first sexual experience is like awkward and unfulfilling. And this is exacerbated by the fact that there's so many like mythologies or fantasies about it, right? Like we have all these movies that condition us like, oh, like there are two people and they're kissing by the moon, and then like the music starts playing, and then like it's like the next morning and it's like everyone's like smiling at each other and they're like, oh my God, that was amazing. That's just not how it works, right? Sex, just like anything else in life, is going to be like awkward and unfulfilling until you get the hang of it. And so this is the first thing to understand. Okay. Next thing to understand is that there are a lot of different things that can make sex difficult. So this person is dealing with like, common difficulties. Okay. So the first is death grip syndrome. So this is just a very physical conditioning thing. So our body gets like conditioned based on particular things. It's almost like a Pavlovian response. So this I see a lot in men who have sex like later in life, right? So we're not maybe like not the first few years, but if you've been masturbating for 18 years, what's going to happen is that your body is going to require a certain kind of stimulation to achieve climax because you've trained it, right? Like you've essentially like trained your penis like a dog. And I'm not saying that to be memeish. I'm saying like there's like Pavlovian conditioning going on. So there's a certain amount of grip strength. There's a certain lack of lubrication. There's like a certain thing that like you've just trained your body to respond to, okay? And so this is where it can be kind of interesting, but then when people actually engage in sexual intercourse, like vaginal intercourse, what they tend to find is that vaginal intercourse does not work. And it doesn't get them to orgasm. And then this creates like a psychological problem, which then this person sort of gets into, right? And they're kind of like, wait, like this is kind of like gross and queasy. So there are kind of different psychological problems like, am I messed up? I think this is, am I asexual, right? So this person has this concern. And then these psychological problems will then in turn lead to, flaccidity, which then in turn will lead to shame, which then will kind of lead to more psychological problems. And then they've kind of like GG'd out, right? It becomes a cycle. So the truth of the matter is that you're not messed up. You've just conditioned your body in a certain way. And the good news is that you can like decondition it as well. So this is where, okay, does that make sense? Do I need to explain that more? Are you all good with that? Okay. So this is where, if you've got death grip syndrome, there are things that you can do. So if we kind of think about, the vagina, and we've got Darth Vader over here, right? Like what are the different features that you need to like kind of get from? So one is a lot of times people who are in this situation use no lube. So what you want to start doing is, and this is highly lubricated, right? So what you want to start doing is like start using lotion. Second thing is that, I don't know how to say, I'm trying to say this without being memeish, but the PSI, the pounds per square inch that your hand is able to exert is going to be like greater than, you know, the PSI for the vag is going to be like a little bit lower, right? So what you want to do is looser grip. So these are the two biggest things that you can do for death grip syndrome, okay? And if you do these, you'll physiologically re-entrain yourself. It's going to feel very unsatisfying because like you're going to want to squeeze harder and you're going to want to use less lotion because this is what you need to climax, right? And so the next thing that we can do, so in terms of a sexual relationship, like, you know, I'm not saying you should go monk mode for the next 2 months and just masturbate using these things. So thankfully, it sounds like you've got a pretty supportive partner. So now we're going to, okay, so we've got a man and we've got a woman. Okay, so let's just add some hair here. And then if we kind of think about, we've got hands, we've got genitals, we've got breasts. Okay, this is the kind of thing where if you just like label the erogenous zones, like your partner can get involved, right? So this is going to get a little bit graphic, but like, you know, you've got erogenous zone number, the ways of delivering and receiving pleasure. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we're going to steer clear of stuff like maybe there's a 5 over here if you want to consider buttholes or scrotums or whatever. I don't know if you guys can even see those numbers. Yeah, sure. Let's be complete. So 5 and 6 are down there. Okay. If you want to get really crazy, you know, feet can be erogenous zones. So there's evidence, for example, that there are non-insulated neurons in the feet of, especially, this is maybe even gender specific, more gender specific. So this is going to sound kind of weird. So you have a spinal cord, right? And so if we think about the human body, like here's your shoulders, right? And then here's like, let's say, you know, your chest. And then down here, we've got genital nerves. And then like over here, we've got foot nerves that kind of come in over here. And it's really interesting because there's even there's a cool hypothesis that I was looking at that if you look at the anatomy, there are non-insulated nerves that from the feet and genitals that run next to each other. So there may be actually an electrical impulse that can travel from a foot nerve to the genital nerves, especially in women. I don't know how really true this is, to be honest, but there's some evidence to this, which suggests that part of the reason that women may be able to get some degree of sexual arousal from feet is through even like anatomical, there may be anatomical correlations here. So it's not just psychological. And then if we kind of think about your partner, right? So let's start from the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? So this is where, like, if you're just thinking about, you know, if you're in this situation, how do you have sex with a partner? There are a lot of options is the short answer, right? So like, even if you are, and what I recommend is that you like naturally get, you sort of start bridging the two, right? So it doesn't have to be 3 plus 6, right? It can be like over here, you can do 1 plus 3, and then, you know, engaging with your partner like 4 plus 1 or 4 plus 6, you know, or 4 plus 2, you know, or your 2 with their 6. And I'm trying to keep this as professional as possible, right? And I'm going to try not to be like, oh yeah, you could like squeeze in a little bit of like 3 plus 2, you know, and add a little bit of 4 plus 8, if you know what I mean. And you know, there's a lot of stuff that you could do. My point is that you can kind of get creative, and much like cooking, it's about like balancing flavors and like trying different kinds of stuff, right? And so I know this is, I know when it comes to sex, people are like automatically like, oh my God, like, ah. But the truth is that there's a lot of science here. Like, this is an important part of health. It's an important part of psychology. And so over time, what you can gradually do is like, you can basically like, if your hand is what you need, maybe like you're using your hand, or maybe she can use her hand, right? Like if what you need is, you know, minimal lube and a tight grip, like you can kind of show her how. And so that she can still be involved in the process, like you can be involved in the process. And then over time, you know, you can do like different things, and you can even like, there are different combos that you can do. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I mean, you can get quite detailed. So in terms of some of the sex therapy that I've done, like it gets like super, super detailed with like even transition points and stuff like that. It's like you can get 90% of the way there using one thing. And when you're super, super close, you transition to something else, which will in a sense kill it. But if you're close enough, you'll kind of still make it the rest of the way there. And it may not be perfectly satisfying, but then your body will have entrained itself a little bit to, finish up in a place where it didn't start. You guys get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Right? So I don't really feel like this is appropriate to go into too much detail on stream. Yeah, like wombo combo, right? And so does that make sense? So like the truth is you can do a lot here. Okay? So questions. So let me just kind of summarize. So like if you're, if you have this myth that like having sex is just going to be amazing the first time around, and especially if you've been masturbating, for years and years and years, sex is not going to be just amazing the first time you do it, right? It's like, it's a practice. Like it's something that you do with your body and your mind that sure, there's a lot of like biological drivers, which are like sort of telling you what to do. But if you've conditioned your body for 18 years to respond to something else, you have to like start the process of like conditioning it towards where you want to go. And you can absolutely do that. So the way that I'd sort of describe this is almost like eating spicy food. Like spicy food can be absolutely amazing. I absolutely love it. And the first time you have it, like if you go too far, you may go way too fat, like, maybe like a terrible experience for you. And then what happens is we have so much discussion. I genuinely think this is a problem. We have so much discussion about variable sexuality that someone will have a negative sexual experience and start to wonder, oh, am I asexual? They'll go down the echo chamber of asexual content, conclude that they are asexual, which could be true, but the simple truth of the matter is that you may just have had a bad sexual experience and like you're not really asexual, you just need to recondition your body. You can be like a, normative sexual behavior. It doesn't mean you're asexual. Like you can actually transition from here to here. And if you sort of adopt that label right from the get-go, then you may actually be missing out on a lot of things. So when I'm supporting people through their own journeys of discovering their sexuality, like this is a really important point, right? That it takes some time and some experimentation to figure things out. Just because you have a negative experience, and there are a lot of people out there who will say, like, if you post this on a forum for asexual people, since the asexual people are trying to be supportive of each other, what they may say is they're like, yeah, you're asexual. Like that was my experience as well. This was my journey. It's okay to be asexual. You're asexual. They may say things like that in an effort to be supportive, and that could actually like be, have a negative impact on that person. I can feel the Shakti leaving my body during this convo. Well, we'll try to get your Shakti back later, okay? Okay, so, for this person, don't give up yet. You really lucked out in terms of who you ended up dating. Give yourself some time, give yourself some patience. And, yeah. Be patient with yourself. I think that's the most important thing. Okay. All right, so we've got kind of a different one now. Oh, chat. Okay, different one, okay? Okay. So next up, we've got a post from a parent. Also, just one other myth that I want to try to dispel for a second. So I see this posted on the internet a lot where like people will post and they'll say that, they'll talk about the number of penises that, how can I say this delicately? I'm just trying to. So people will say that like, if a woman has had sex with a lot of different men, that her vagina will be loose. And for some reason, they think that having sex with the same penis over and over again does not make it loose. So I don't know how else to say this, but like, just because you take big bites of a Subway sandwich doesn't mean that your mouth is like hanging open all the time. Does that make sense, chat? Oh God, why is this not focusing? Focus, autofocus. Right, just because you eat a lot of the Subway doesn't mean your mouth is like this all the time, right? The body is elastic. Like opening your mouth really big and taking big bites does not give you like a very loose mouth. And in the same way, having sex with one penis or lots of penises does not alter the elasticity of your vagina. It's just not physiologic. Like, I don't know where people get this idea. Like, just because you poop out huge turds does not give you like a loose asshole. It just, like, it's just not how it works. Like, I'm sure that's going to get clipped out of context or whatever, but just saying, chat, like, you need to understand that, right? Are we all on the same page there? It's just physiologically, it's like no amount of sticking your finger in your nose is going to give you like a gigantic nostril. Like, it's just not how it works. Got it? Okay. Someone was like, I just tuned in. Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know. Like, so I struggle with saying things like that on stream because I recognize that people are going to think it's like meme-ish, but it's also like people are out there saying this, right? People believe this. Like, I don't know where they get this idea. So, anyway. Like, seriously, like, I think that's part of our mission here, and we can't avoid, or maybe we should. So I'm open to feedback. If people think that this was a mistake on stream, maybe my team will tell me, like, don't say things like this. But if y'all think this is good on stream, like, please let us know. If you guys think that it's not good on stream and you think that it does deplete your Shakti and we shouldn't be talking about this stuff, please let us know. Because I think, once again, we have so many, like, romantic or mythologized notions about sexuality that, like, people will think that, oh, if I have sex with lots of men, like, I will have a loose vagina. Like, women will think that too. Right? Like, men will like start dating someone and you really like someone, but you have this myth that if they've had more partners than you have, then you break up with them. And it's like you're missing out on something. You're judging that person like arguably unfairly. Maybe you're judging them fairly. You're allowed to make whatever judgments you want to. So I it's hard because there's a lot of stuff out there that is meme friendly, but is also like really important PSAs. We're going to like take a big shift, okay, chat? Because we're, So get the memes out of the system, chat. Shift. School shooting and death threats. I found your video about the Michigan high school tragedy really hit home with me this week. My daughter is being bullied in high school by an 18-year-old male senior. She is 14. He's mentioned to her about any day being her last, leaving her beaten and bloodied in a ditch, getting other girls to jump her, bringing a gun to school, and raping her. They have PE together. Not sure how that works with age difference, but here we are. I'm unable to file further police reports with the school police, and the city police will just route me back to the school police. The dean, principal, and superintendent said they cannot really do anything with verbal threats, but it has been documented. He has also been reported by other girls at the same high school for similar threats. They said they could make a safety plan where the bully walks down hall A and my daughter walks down hall B so that they don't see each other. They may change his classes, but he has a right to education, so they won't impede on it. The officers I have spoken to mention their procedures to determine if they need to search his house for weapons, but typically they can't do anything like that without proper evidence, which makes perfect sense. I'm at a wall. I want to meet with this boy or his parents, which is absolutely unacceptable if I stop to think about it logically. I poked at pressing charges with a lawyer, but it probably won't go anywhere. Their words, not mine. I can go to the press, but my daughter asked me not to make a huge spotlight on her about this. She is concerned about aggravating him and making things worse for her. I've been watching your videos since the beginning. I put a lot of your words and advice into practice, and I've grown into a much better man than I was before. I'm not worried about me. I'm worried for her and her safety. I'm very supportive of my daughter, and we have open and honest conversations about her emotions and awareness. I feel stuck. We pulled her from school for now. What further actions can I take? So once again, really important post, not nearly as entertaining as any of the others, which is completely appropriate. So this is a super challenging situation. So I want to start by talking about a couple of different things. This may be a little bit tricky. Okay, chat? So there's a lot of different elements to this situation. The first is to understand, so this is a case of a parent who is trying to protect their daughter and seems to have run into a dead end in terms of like how to protect his daughter, right? I'm assuming it's a man, by the way. Hold on. Let me just, that may be incorrect. Yeah. So they do say, I've grown into a much better man than I was before. So it looks like it's a father. So what we're going to talk a little bit about is institutions, understanding institutions. I'm going to just stream of consciousness my experience of these situations, which is oddly enough, like pretty high. So I don't know if y'all kind of get this, but as a psychiatrist, we deal with a lot of troubled kids. And so then there's like a whole process to a kid being labeled a troubled kid. So I don't really know. I'm not a lawyer, so big disclaimer. So no medical advice here. I'm not a lawyer. I don't actually know how the internal state of a lot of these institutions work. So take a lot of what I say with a grain of salt. But I'm going to share some stuff about institutions, the process of getting kids like this disciplined or helped in terms of what I have seen as a psychiatrist. So sometimes, for example, I will have a court mandated order to conduct therapy with like a 17-year-old high school student who has had behavioral problems and been violent. So there are institutional experiences. I'm just going to have them from the psychiatrist side. So I'm going to share some of those. So we're going to talk about institutions, their processes, and what the process looks like from a psychiatric perspective. We're also going to talk about power dynamics. So this is kind of a high-level conversation to understand if you are a parent and there is an institution that is not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Unfortunately, you may have to really understand the power dynamics of the situation and leverage those power dynamics for your favor. The third thing that I'm going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do and so considerations for yourself and the actions that you can take, and the considerations for your daughter and what to think about in terms of like her experience and how to protect her. So the first thing is that this person has filed reports. The school is aware of it. Multiple people have made complaints, and they've also spoken with the school police and the regular police. And what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of different reports that have been filed, but nothing has really been done about it. So let's start with the kid. So the kid could just be a bully, or they could have something going on that leads them to this behavior, okay? So what I mean by that is they may have been abused themselves. They may have mental illness. They may have antisocial personality disorder. We really have no idea. So the key thing, though, is there could be like a mental health component to this case, or the kid just could be an asshole, right? So that's like one differentiation that we sort of need to like understand for a moment. And so the next thing is that we don't really know like what this person's parents are like, right? So it's possible that the reason is able to get away with this bullying is because the parents don't set good limits on the kid. Maybe the kid just has never met consequences in their life, which is why they're like that. That's not a mental illness. That's just bad parenting. So the first kind of differentiation is to understand that this could be a case of bad parenting. This could be a case of it could also be a case of not bad parenting, but good parenting with a kid who's just really, really hard to deal with. We've seen that too. Or it could be a case of something more like mental illness in nature, like trauma. Okay, so that's the first thing. This is what's going on with the bully. Now, generally speaking, schools have processes. Okay, so let's talk about institutions. And that schools, have processes and procedures to handle things like this. And if you make a complaint, they're going to funnel you through the pipeline. And then oftentimes the pipeline will come to an end and the school will shrug their shoulders and say, this is all we can do. Oftentimes they can do more. They just are not willing to because the power dynamics and the pressure on them is not high enough. So I'll give you guys an example. So generally speaking, a school district is required, like they said, to provide this child with an education. The interesting thing is that the school district is not necessarily required to provide that child with this education at this school. So oftentimes the reason that schools are hesitant to do anything is because if they take this kid out of school, they essentially have to pay a higher cost to get that kid educated at a higher intensity institution. So if this kid essentially gets put into special ed because of behavioral problems, and those kinds of schools exist, the school has to pay for it. So they are oftentimes loath to do that because they have tight budgets and they sort of can't afford it. Right? So there are special schools that exist for kids like this who are serial offenders. The problem is that those schools are very, very expensive and it has to come out of the school's budget. So oftentimes what the school has to do is like they kind of have to be pushed into it. So the first piece of concrete advice and this is where the power dynamics come in, because they've sort of followed their process and procedure. And this is also sort of not their fault because the processes and procedures that exist with our institutions are no longer sufficient to deal with the situations that we deal with. This is a big part of the school shooting video, which is like sort of acknowledging that like this is all we can do and shrugging up our shoulders is not good enough. I understand that the school has a process and procedure. So as a parent, what you want to do is go through the process. You don't want to be an asshole. You want to be kind, respectful, polite, and insistent, right? So you want to go through the process, and then you also want to like exert some power, which we'll talk about in a second, okay? So they've got a process, and so for example, the police thing makes a lot of sense. So what tends to happen is if there is a police unit which has jurisdiction over the school, going to the municipal police or city police and trying to file a complaint is not going to work because they're like, this is not our jurisdiction, it's the school jurisdiction. So you may, for example, be like, that's a policy and procedure that you should do your best to respect. At the same time, you want to push it within the institution as hard as you can and maybe start working outside of the institution, which we'll talk about. So the first thing is like, we got to understand not the first thing, I guess the fifth thing is we got to understand the power dynamics of the situation. And I'm going to start to provide you with some suggestions. I don't know that this is actually advice that you should follow because this is not my area of expertise. So you say that, so if you are a parent who has a child who's being bullied and you're running into dead ends at institutions, here is how I would recommend going about it, okay? So I've seen what it takes to get that kid into special education. So I'm going to try to equip y'all with my understanding of like how to get that kid into special education and away from your child. So the first thing is you say that there have been lots of reports and documentation. The first thing that you should do is get a copy of anything that you can. You don't want to threaten. You don't want to be upset about it. You don't want to like let anyone like freak out the school or the police with anything that you're going to do. So you want to play nice. You want to get your hands on as much documentation as you can. So if there have been reports filed, you need to go to your school and say, hey, I'd like a copy of the reports. If they ask you why, you can say, I'm thinking about finding a therapist for my daughter, and I just want documentation to give to the therapist, okay? You go to the police, and you get a copy of every single police report that has been filed, okay? So the first thing that you may run into will be a little bit weird, which is that all of these things that have been reported and filed may not exist. This is very, very common, because people will say they file a report, but they may not actually file the report, or they may not want to give it to you. So if you get any kind of pushback, once again, you want to be nice, right? You want to say, hey, I asked for this report. Where is it? Then you can also ask direct questions at some point. I just want to be clear, like, has this been documented in some way or not? And this is the next thing that you want to do is you want to document all of these conversations. So if you are in a one-party consent state for voice recording, you want to start making phone calls instead of going to meetings. And if you are in a one-party consent state, you should record all of those phone calls. Anytime you get told that there have been reports, you need to, and you don't get your hands on them, you need to document that. You can say that these incidents were, the school was notified on 10/1, 10/5, 10/9 of these things. I was told by this person at this time that this had been reported and filed. I have asked for a copy of these 3 things and I have not received it. So you want to document to that effect as well, okay? So you just want to document. So if you go to the police and they say, we can file another report, but that's all we can do, or we have filed too many reports, we cannot file a further report. You need to document that as well. And this is what you document. I approached the school police and superintendent that my daughter received a death threat, and they informed me that they could not document this. And so no documentation. They chose not to document this threat against my daughter's life. So you want to document the refusal of documentation if that even happens, okay? So once you have, so you want to try to get as many copies of this as you can. So you want to get like copies of everything. So you say that I just want it for my personal file. I want it for a therapist. I just want to understand like what's in the report. I'd like to read it. Use whatever reason you want to. You just want to, you don't want to go down this path and rely on an external institution to produce documents for you at the right time. Okay? So the second thing is you should document it. The other thing is if they're offering a safety plan, you should take advantage of it, right? So anything that the school offers to do, you want to say yes, please, and thank you. So you want to be a willing participant in this game. So you say, thank you very much for, offering the safety plan. I would feel much safer with that. My daughter would feel much safer with that. We really, really appreciate everything that the school is doing. By the way, can I get a copy of the safety plan? Right? So what is the plan? How does it work? Things like that. I'm also curious, like you said that this 18-year-old has a PE with a 14-year-old, and like what's the PE teacher doing? Is the PE teacher aware that this is kind of going on? So I'd also like kind of investigate a little bit there. But the first thing is that you document. Okay. Next thing is that you want to talk to the kid's parents, and I would say that that is a interesting play. I would generally steer clear of it. What I would do is ask the school, have the parents been made aware that the kid is doing this? And ask the school, do you know if the parents are trying to do anything? So the parents may respond very defensively. It's tricky. You don't know what the parents are going to do, right? The parents may be like good parents that just don't realize that their kid is like doing all this stuff on the side. Because newsflash, not all parents know what their 18-year-old is doing, right? Like, in fact, most of them don't. So it's possible that if you alert the parents, and you do so in a respectful, non-attacking way, say, hey, our daughter has told us that your son is making these kinds of statements. What do you think about that? And they'd say like, oh, I'm shocked. Or they'd say, they'd never do that. Your daughter's a fucking liar. So like, you'll see what the color of the parents are. And if they're not willing to engage you in conversation, like don't bother, right? So don't try to convince them of anything. Don't get pissed off. You need to stay calm, cool, and collected. Next thing to think about, so let's just start with documentation because we're going to talk about power dynamics in a second, okay? Next thing, let's talk about your daughter. So the first thing that you should probably do, so first of all, props for being a thoughtful parent, props for having open emotional conversations with her, props for seeking outside help wherever you can find it, including posting on our subreddit. So you may want to, continue talking to her. You know, if you want to pull her out of school and she wants to be pulled out of school, I think you can do that for some amount of time. A couple of things to remember is that bullies tend to get bored easily. So oftentimes, like if this kid is an 18-year-old senior, like your daughter may not need to deal with him for much longer. So the first thing is that the bully could get bored and he may start picking on other people. Second thing that could happen is that ultimately the kid should graduate at the end of the year, and then your daughter should be free of him. So you should just talk to your daughter about, hey, are you willing to do you want to go to school? Do you not want to go to school? Like, what do you want to do? Like, what do you feel comfortable with? And unfortunately, this is sort of a situation where if you aggravate a bully, they may escalate. So that's where you have to be really careful as a parent. Either we're going to escalate really high or we're not going to escalate much, right? That's what you need to be careful, because if you escalate and the bully escalates, you need to be able to hit back with, metaphorically, with a lot of force, which we're going to equip you with if you decide to go down that route. Okay? And so your daughter has a very valid concern that you should respect. She may not want the spotlight, which is also totally fine. The other very concrete thing that I do is consider finding her a therapist so that she has someone to talk through this stuff with. Okay? So this is the sort of thing. You don't want to pick a fight unless you know you can win. So when it comes to bullies, you need to be well equipped to deal with that. Okay. So this is where, remember, you want to get documentation, but you don't want to stir any feathers. You don't want to upset anyone. Okay. So generally speaking, when it comes to boundary setting and power dynamics, this is what I would advocate. You want a fist of iron in a velvet glove. So you want to play really nice, but once you set a limit or once you decide to take an action, you want to follow through with that action. So a classic example of a mistake in this realm, the parent, in my opinion, has made only one mistake. And that is, I poked at pressing charges with a lawyer, but it probably won't go anywhere. So you never, when dealing with power dynamics and boundary situations, you never want to make threats. You just want to sucker punch. So you don't want to tell the school, unless you guys do this, I'm going to sue. You want to serve them with papers. You want to go through the process, and then you want to press charges. Okay? You don't want to tell people that you're going to press charges. You want to give them the opportunity to have a discussion. You want to give them an opportunity to act. And when they don't act, you want to enforce a boundary. Okay? So this is where, once you have the documentation, I would go and talk to your school and say, so like, here's like a list of all the documentation. What are you telling me that you can do in this situation? And this is where you may even want to say to them that I'm concerned that this kid could be another school shooter in the making. This is also where another thing that you want to do. So the avenues of power that you have. So if you're talking directly to the school, they may not be able to do much, or they may not be willing to do much, which is fine. So the next thing that you want to do is find the other parents. So there may be WhatsApp groups, or the kid has made threats against other parents or other kids. You want to talk to those parents, form a WhatsApp group, get all of them to get their documentation as well. Have them start filing reports. And this is where you want to create a mountain of documentation from 5 or 6 different people. This is also where, as a parent, what you may want to do is create something like a WhatsApp group and then start talking as parents. Hey, so I'm concerned about my daughter's safety. I'm curious, is anyone else concerned about their daughter's safety? And you want to start communicating as parents. This is where, unfortunately, if the institutions fail us, we need to take responsibility ourselves and find out who is around to help us. That's the whole point of Healthy Gamer, right? So we're here because the medical system has been insufficient at meeting the needs of our generation. So I'm not bashing the medical system. It's designed to do what it does, and it does what it does really well. But the needs have evolved, and the medical system has not caught up, which is why we're here, right? So we're here to try to supplement it. We're not trying to be medicine. What we're acknowledging is that mental health challenges are not all mental illness. And it makes sense, because that's the medical system's job is mental illness. But there are mental health problems that go beyond mental illness, which is why we cropped up. So I'd say kind of the same thing. So the school and the police, their hands may be tied because their job is not safety or prevention. It is punishment or discipline after the fact. So that's fine. If that's what they're willing to do, if their hands are tied, that's totally fine. So this is where you're going to start talking to other parents and, especially if you can get documentation or get in touch with the other parents who are being bullied, ask them to file reports. And at this point, the school may figure out that something is up, that there's some kind of organization going on. If they smell that organization is going on, that may exert a power pressure on them to make a change. So that's good news. So you're never going to ask for it. You're never going to throw a fit. You're not going to threaten anyone. You're going to be calm, cool, and collected the whole time. So once you start to get parents together, your WhatsApp group may grow. You guys may have open-ended conversations about kids' safety. How do y'all think we should deal with this? I'm struggling to deal with, there's a senior that's been bullying my daughter, telling her that she's going to get raped, that she's going to shoot her. I've filed a report with the police. I filed a report with the school. The behavior is still continuing. Does anyone have any ideas about what we can do? Is anyone else experiencing these things? And as parents start sharing their stories, you're going to collect all that data. Then, depending on what your daughter wants, once you have all of these reports, you've got 3 options. One is you can go to the school and you can say, hey, so we've got 6 parents. This kid is threatening lots of different people, and we don't feel safe with this situation. We don't really know exactly what to do. Can you please help us? So always ask for help. Is it possible that the kid can get transferred to a different school? What measures can you as a school take to deal with this kind of behavior? And if the school says, I'm sorry, we can't do anything, then you say, okay, thank you for trying. We really appreciate it. Send them something in writing, right? Say, hey, I'm very sorry that I thank you for meeting with me. Thank you for meeting with me. I really appreciate that you listened to our concerns, that this child has threatened death on 6 different students, and that the school is unable to do anything. We're really sorry to hear that. We're very concerned for our safety. Send it to them via certified mail. They'll figure it out. They'll get the signal. You don't want to threaten a damn thing. Now you've got a choice. Okay, so depending on how much you want to escalate. So the first thing is, it sounds like the kid is 18. So you can, as I understand, as an adult, threatening death or rape is a criminal act, right? So this is where, like, the kid may not be under the school's jurisdiction. So you may want to talk to an attorney about this, but you may be able to do everything from file criminal charges. And if you have a pile of police reports and a pile of school reports from multiple different students, all y'all can get together and file separate charges, and then, like, someone will take notice. The other thing that you may be able to do is get a restraining order, right? So you may, like, be able to go to a judge and say that I need a restraining order. This person is threatening this person's life. And then, like, the school won't want you to do that because a restraining order may complicate things. So they may be forced, if a judge files a restraining order, so you don't want to talk to the school, you don't want to talk to the police, you kind of, like, exert power where you can. So now that you have all the documents, you go to a judge and you say, hey, I need a restraining order to protect my child. Bonus points if you have all these other documentation from other parents. Here's 14 police reports and school reports documenting this person's threat of violence. My child needs a restraining order. The judge hopefully will grant it. Talk to a lawyer about this kind of thing. And then once the restraining order is granted, then the school may be screwed. Then you go to the school and you say, hey, a judge has granted a restraining order that this kid cannot be within 30 feet of my daughter. And then they're like, well, fuck, what are we supposed to do now? I don't know. You guys figure it out. But if he is in violation of the restraining order, we're going to call the police and we're going to have him arrested. At this point, hopefully you've at least tried some kind of contact with the parents, because the kid's parents could be a huge ally or a huge enemy. But if if they're an ally, then maybe you've never gotten this far and they discipline their child. If they're an enemy, then there's a restraining order. And now the kid can't escalate. Or if he escalates, he's going to be in a lot of trouble. So this is the other thing with bullies, is that, like, they understand the language of power. So unfortunately, like, if you're going to escalate, you need to go as far as you can. And you have to understand that by filing a restraining order, you may actually be increasing the risk of violence against your daughter. I have no way of understanding, like, what that risk is, right? So I don't know. So this is where, like, we have a legal system, and I don't know how to weigh the psychological impact of using the legal system. But it is my belief that if there are systems and, like, a legal system or institutions in place, we should play by those rules instead of, like, taking things into our own hands. Next thing that you can do is go to the media. And this is where, like, you go to your local media station, you say, hey, there's a kid who's had 14 police reports filed against him, is threatening school shootings, and the school is not doing anything about it. The media will jump on that. Holy shit, would they love it? And then there'll be a story. And then, like, the school will then be upset. And then they'll come to you, and then you'll start to see changes happen. And if the school is like, I wish you had talked to us, if they ever have a conversation with them, you can say, yeah, no, I don't blame you at all. It's just, you did what you could. And so we didn't know what else to do. So we started talking to reporters. So we wanted to raise awareness around safety. So it seems like you guys did everything that you could. I'm very grateful that y'all did everything that you could. And we just didn't feel that that was sufficient for our safety. So we decided to, like, increase awareness. So you need to be super careful about all this stuff. You should absolutely consult an attorney. I'm not an attorney. I also don't know, once again, like, what pushes school shooters over the edge. We have no idea because we don't research school shooters. We don't know if this is a bully. We don't really know what's going on. So all of these come with risks, and that's why it starts with your kid. So a couple of just takeaways, like, don't ever threaten, just act, right? So, like, follow the book. Don't piss anyone off. Don't be difficult. Try to be polite. Try to work with people. Try to work within the institutions. And then take action when you need to. Right? I think that's the ultimate goal. And generally speaking, schools will respond. They'll be forced to respond. So when there's, like, a media story, like, the superintendent is going to get a call from someone. And they're going to be like, this is a PR nightmare. And then, and this is where, like, I think the parents, like, you have to remember that the kid is 18. And, like, sometimes the best thing that you can do for this child, as someone who has treated kids like this, is, like, set consequences for them. Like, there needs to be a price to be paid. Otherwise, the kid isn't going to learn because the kid's like not getting punished. Like, what's happening? Nothing. So you want to make sure that you don't dox anyone, you don't sick anyone on anyone, you don't want to like attack anyone. I'm just saying use whatever means are at your disposal to protect your child. Does that make sense? Yeah, when you say this doesn't work if the other kid's parents are more affluent than the victim's kid's parents, which is, I don't know what not work means. So does that mean that they're going to hire really fancy lawyers that will protect their son? Sure, they may do that. But the son, I would be careful about things not working because I've had those kids too. So generally speaking, when you have very wealthy and affluent and powerful parents who have to go to court and there's media stuff that shames them, they're going to be pissed at their kid. They'll pull his ass out of the fire, but they're going to be livid that their social standing in shame is like, and that's where you can be nice to the parents. That's why I'm saying, like, don't be mean to the parents. Try to play nice with them and say, like, hey, we just didn't know what else to do. Like, we're trying to protect our kid. Nothing against your kid. It's just, we did what we could. Yeah, so the thing is, the kid's parents are just an unknown, so it's hard to really figure out what to do. And this is where, I don't want to make anyone out to be a bad guy, because I think this is really like a systemic failure, right? Like what I'm hearing here is that there is not a good avenue for rehabilitation of like bullying behavior. And you can even bring that up with the school if you want to. You can say, like, we're really concerned that behavior is still going on. And, like, we're not really sure what to do. And if you have all this documentation, if you ever... this is the kind of thing that you don't threaten people. But, as I understand, the school shooter's parents are being held somewhat responsible for his actions or their negligence. And so, like, hopefully, that's something that you can sort of leverage. You could say, like, if the kid does anything, like, y'all were aware of this, there have been police reports filed and you guys did nothing. So if anything happens, you don't want to say that. So like, this is where you want to make, like, there's subtle statements that you can make. So a good example is, so let me understand. So you don't want to threaten, but you want to say things like, so let me understand this properly. You're telling me that you have multiple police reports that this person has threatened violence, that this is a pattern of behavior, that he has threatened multiple people in the school, and that you are doing nothing to protect against this violence occurring? Just ask the parents that. I mean, ask the school that. What steps are you taking? Okay, so what you're saying is that the kid is not going to walk in the same hallway, but he's still going to be exposed. It doesn't sound like you guys are trying to intervene with the kid in any way, shape, or form. So you are aware of a danger, and your solution is to, during the 55 minutes of the day that my child is in the hall, you're going to keep this kid away from her, but you're going to let them be in the same class. And then what you kind of want to signal to them is you are aware that this is a danger and you are not taking steps to address the danger. Am I understanding that correctly? So you want to be calm. Am I understanding that correctly? And then they will say, yes, you are. Or they will say, no, we are taking steps. And then you say, what steps are you taking? They're like, that's all we can do. It's the most we can do. I understand. Okay. So you're aware of the danger, but you're not able to act to protect my child or these other 5 children. Am I understanding that correctly? And then they're like, they don't like answering that question. They really do not. And then you will start to see change happen. My heart goes out to you. This is a really scary situation. I wish I had better information. So I'd say, just to kind of recap, talk to your daughter first. Before any of this other crap, talk to an attorney, because I'm not an attorney. I don't really know what getting a restraining order looks like. I don't know. But I have had kids, for example, that have restraining orders against their parents. The good news is that there are lots of so once the kid gets plugged into the pipeline, So something will happen, things will escalate, and at some point the kid will get like plugged into a pipeline. You can also try talking to other institutions like Child Protective Services. So normally they get called on parents, but you can try to call them and say, hey, I have this situation at the school. I've run into a dead end. I'm concerned about the safety of my child. And I'm concerned that, this kid could be violent towards other people. Is there like a caseworker that I can talk to? And just get to talk to people, get Child Protective Services documentation. And then like at some point you can continue escalating with your pile of documentation. You may even want to talk to the mayor or talk to your congressman or something like that. Like you may even want to talk to someone in the Department of Education. I actually know someone who's a lawyer he's an attorney for the Department of Education. It's been really interesting to hear his perspective and how things work. The short answer is things do happen. They just happen slowly. Right? So I think that this is where arm yourself with documentation, and then see what's the right move for you. And remember that it's very possible that she can just keep her head under the radar. You can find her therapy and that the kid will move on. Okay? Yeah, I mean, it's hard. What can the daughter do? Oh, man. So the saddest thing about this is that the daughter shouldn't have to do anything. Right? Like, this is where so y'all, let me explain. So like you can't, so it's sometimes like, their responsibility, like it's institutional responsibility to take care of things. But the truth of the matter is that like institutions are not perfect, right? They have their own pressures. They have their own internal like concerns. They're not like, what can a school do? Right? Like, just think about it. Like, if you're the superintendent and you're in this situation, like, what can you do? You filed a police report. Then what? Like, let's say you've tried talking to the kid, you've tried talking to the parents, and they're, like, not willing to work with. What are you supposed to do? So the point is that there's something about what our institutions are made to deal with is not, there isn't, like, an institutional way to deal with, like, threats of violence at school. I just don't know what it is. And so this is where the pressure to create those pathways has to come from us. So if you see some problem in the world, like Mahatma Gandhi said, I know he's he's a little bit more of a controversial figure than we used to believe. But I do think he had one thing right, which was be the change that you want to see in the world. Right? So if something's not right, like you want to advocate for your daughter, I think it's also important for you to signal to your daughter, hey, this is what we can do to protect you. Here are the options. Also teach her as a young woman that there's like, that you should try to work with authority, but also recognize that authority may not always have your back. That's a very, very important lesson for young women, especially to learn, right? That like, sometimes you got to you got to really advocate for yourself and you can't rely on someone else to fix the problem. Yeah, so someone's asking they can't suspend the bully. It blows my mind that the kid has not been expelled or suspended. That's why I suspect that there's some weird shenanigans going on with the reports. Because like if the kid should have been suspended or expelled. Like they have avenues for that. And so that's why I'm saying start with documentation before raising any alarms. Like I don't understand what is going on there. Something weird is going on. So get the documentation as best as you can. Yeah, so this is where someone's saying anyone who hit anyone at my school got suspended. So the problem, so that may be where the school's hands are tied. Right? And that's where, like, I think the conversation with the school is, once again, not threatening. It's like, hey, I understand your hands are tied. How do we work through this? So I'm hearing that you guys can't suspend him because he hasn't done anything yet. But as a parent, like, I'm kind of confused because he's threatening to do something. And are you saying that, like, once he sexually assaults my daughter, then y'all are going to do something? Is there really nothing else that can be done? So try to work with them, right? So, like, try to be like, you guys are really telling me there's nothing you can do? Try to get them on your side because they're your ally. They should be your ally. You don't want to go in there like threatening and stuff like that. Right? And this is where, over time, as enough of these cases happen, then, hopefully institutions will start changing their policies. Yeah, so Aesop Curran is saying to the dad, way to support your daughter. Just the fact that you take it seriously and you're trying is huge for her mental health. Get her therapy too. Like, I couldn't echo it better. Great. Other thing is that, you can keep it's not the end of the world to keep your daughter out of school for a year. Like freshman year is really tough to miss because that's when a lot of cliques and stuff form. But I'd say get her into extracurriculars so that she can like socialize like kind of well. Or, like ask the school, is there like a different PE class that she can join? Like, why does she have to be in PE with this person? Like there may be schedule changes or things like that you can do to get her away from the kid. Or can she just sit out for PE? Like there may be all kinds of things that you can do. So try to work with the school. They're not your enemy. So they don't have to be your enemy for you to exert leverage on them, right? It's just, you have to, that has to be a last option. So one person's asking, why do kids in the US need so much attention and care? So that's a great question. The real question that I have is, do kids in the US need more attention or care? Or is it just that we are aware of what the kids' needs are? Right? It's kind of like this question of like, why is so many people why is autism on the increase? Is autism really increasing? Or is it just that our ability to detect a problem is better? So it looks like there's a bigger problem and that things are getting worse. I don't know that kids in the US need more care than kids in other countries. It just may be that we're more aware of the fact that they need care. I don't know. So if you look at, for example, worldwide epidemiology for mental illness, it tends to be pretty broad, like pretty consistent. So there is some variation, but like 10 to 20% of people worldwide will have like depression or anxiety. Okay. We are over time. I had one more, but there's going to be a meditation on that one. But I think I may have to bounce. I wish I had. I'm kind of drawing a blank on meditation. So, let me just think. What can we do? Okay, we can try to speed run one because I had a meditation prepared for the next one. So let's try to do that. Okay, then I gotta go eat something. So Lyun1595 keeps asking this question: how do I deal with anhedonia? So anhedonia doesn't have a treatment, but I would definitely recommend Dr. K's Guide to Depression. So that has a very multidisciplinary approach to depression, both spiritual, diet stuff, things like that. And since anhedonia may be some combination of a depressive symptom or something related to your dopamine system, hopefully you'll find a lot of good options in there, everything from meditation to diet. So that's what I would suggest. Cortisol reducing meditation. All meditations reduce cortisol. Anhedonia is the inability to feel pleasure. Okay. All right, so we're going to teach y'all, this is going to be kind of weird, but we're going to do a little bit of like Nyan Yoga. Okay. So Dr. K, how do you become more decisive in get over the fear of making the wrong decision in life? I'm struggling with indecision lately. Sometimes it is difficult for me to make decisions on what to do on a daily, moment-to-moment basis. It is also difficult for me to decide what to do next in my life. I get overwhelmed with all the options and choices, can't figure out what I truly want anymore, and am paralyzed by a fear of making the wrong life choices. I feel as if I don't have freedom and spontaneity. I deliberate on things too much and end up not making any decision because I fear that I might start something and end up not liking it, and then there'll be no way to get out of it. This happens more with big life decisions, like what direction to go in next. I realize my indecision protects me from not having to make a choice. But I feel that I've always been like this. As a kid, I was easily overwhelmed and would often have this feeling of time running out. And then I would throw a tantrum because I felt trapped, as if the walls were closing in on me. Today, this feeling persists in my decision making, though not always as strong. How do you become more decisive? Is there some kind of exercise or practice that would help with this indecision and fear of making the wrong choice? So the short answer is yes. So we're going to approach this from a couple of different angles. First, we're going to take a Jnana Yoga angle. So Jnana Yoga is the path of knowledge. So we're going to examine this using like the ability of contemplation. The second thing that we're going to reference is sort of specifically what is going on with this person and where this kind of indecision comes from. The third thing that we're going to touch on is strategies to deal with indecision. And the last thing we're going to touch on is a meditation of sorts that will theoretically help with this, but it's a little bit more advanced. Okay? So the first thing is, so this person is concerned about making the right decision or the wrong decision. So what is a right decision or wrong decision? So this is kind of the path of Jnana Yoga. So anytime you're faced with a difficulty in life, what Jnana Yoga says is understand the nature of the thing. So we're not going to like fix it. We're just going to understand how it works. We're going to try to figure out what are the laws of physics here? Like what are the equations that govern gravity and electromagnetism and Newtonian mechanics, right? We're just going to try to figure out what the laws that govern this are. So what is a right decision and what is a wrong decision? What do y'all think, chat? How do you know if you're making the right decision or the wrong decision? Okay, so I'm going to tell you all a story. So I had a patient about, let me make sure I get this right, about 6 years ago that was in a competitive work environment. And they were scheduled for a meeting. So there was a promotion opening up. And they were in a very competitive work environment. They had a colleague that they disliked. And they were scheduled for a meeting to lobby for the promotion. Okay? So the meeting was at like 10:30 or something. So they get to their office, and at about 9:15 they get a call that their father has fainted. And so they really don't have a choice, but they're so they have to leave. They have to cancel the meeting. They're really kind of frustrated with themselves. In a sense, they don't really blame their father, but they're kind of blaming their father because they're missing this meeting. They're also playing doomsday scenarios in their mind that, now that I missed this meeting, my colleague who I dislike will get the promotion. I'm going to have to report into them. There's a lot of doomsday in their head. And so they go home, they take care of their dad. They take their dad to the emergency room. They spend the bulk of the day there. They miss their meeting. Their colleague has the meeting. So the person is kind of screwed. They're sitting in the emergency room with their dad watching the television when they see that something has happened. And that it turns out that a plane has flown into the building where they work. And it happened to be September 11th, 2001. And so this person was so upset about the promotion. Real story, by the way. So at McLean Hospital, they have a trauma program for first responders. And I was running groups with this program when I ended up meeting this person, and they sort of shared this story with me. And turns out that if they had been in the office that day, they wouldn't be alive. And so, like, it really struck me. Like, so we had a long conversation about karma. Real story, 100%. So we had a conversation about karma and, what's good for you and what's not good for you. And this person was really fantastic. They were sharing a lot of their perspective about what they learned from this experience. And so it really makes me wonder, like, what is the right decision and what is the wrong decision, right? So how do you measure it? Like, how do you measure it, right? How do you know if you're making the right decision or the wrong decision? So I'll give you guys like another example. So this is like a personal one that I'm sure y'all have heard before. So there's no situation in which a 4.0 is inferior to a 2.5, right? Like you always want a 2.5 GPA. You never want a 4.0 GPA. And when I was in school, I was sure that I was making all the wrong decisions. Like I was sleeping through Spanish class. Got an F in Spanish, chat. First semester of freshman year. First F. GG. And so you can't think in that moment, you're thinking, oh, this is the wrong decision. Like I should have gotten an A, right? Because an A is better. But it turns out that if people who are struggling to find motivation on the internet, if they listen to someone who's gotten a 4.0 their entire life, they're going to have trouble relating to that person, or the person who's gotten a 4.0 their entire life will have trouble relating to them. And so it's kind of bizarre, but like we just don't know what the right decisions are or the wrong decisions. You can even logically, like even if you step away from my two visceral examples and you say, Dr. K, you're not forming a good enough argument. So then I'm curious, like genuinely forget about what I say. What are the metrics that you measure a decision by, right? Is it what happens in the future? So then the question is kind of interesting because it's like, like even if circumstances, like if I drive drunk, for example, and I don't get into an accident, is that the right decision or the wrong decision to drive drunk? Because there was no consequence, right? So do you measure a right decision or wrong decision by the consequence? Well, that's kind of interesting because it doesn't feel to me that, like, I think driving drunk is always bad, like irrespective of whether you dodge a bullet or not. And so how do you measure what is this idea of right decision or wrong decision? Really think about that. If you're paralyzed because you're trying to make the right decision, how the F would you even know? What does that mean for you? What does it mean to you to make the right decision? And what Jnana Yoga, that's what Jnana Yoga sort of teaches, is ask yourself, where do you get this concept of a right decision or wrong decision? And now it turns out that the concept comes from a couple of different places. So the truth of the matter is that there are two things going on here. If you're stuck in making the right decision versus wrong decision, two issues at play. One is like a cognitive challenge or problem called the planning fallacy. And the second is the way that we're conditioned. So the first thing to understand is the planning fallacy. And this is why you can't make the right decision. So people want to make plans. Why do you want to make a plan? You want to make a plan so that things end up going well, right? That's why you want to make the right decision. So you plan out what decisions you're going to make so you end up in the place that you want to go. That's what a right decision is. So the problem is that when do you make a plan? You make a plan at the beginning. And how much information do you have at the beginning? You have the least information. How much information do you have at the end? You have the most information. Therefore, when can you make the best plan? The best plan can be made at the end, and the worst plan can be made at the beginning. Therefore, in a weird way, any plan that you make kind of projecting into the future, it's not technically true this way, but it's the planning fallacy, is just this idea that when you try to make a plan, like if you're trying to figure out what you want to major in at the age of 18 and you feel locked into that, you don't understand anything about the careers that you're committing to, right? Like you don't understand, like if you major in pre-med, you have no idea what it's like to be a doctor. And this is a prime example of the planning fallacy. That when you make plans, you have the least amount of information. Therefore, they end up being the worst plans that you could by definition make because you don't have enough information. The best way to figure out what you should major in college is to go to college for years, figure out what the right major is, go back in time and tell your 18-year-old self, hey, this is what you'll major in because it'll work for you. But we can't do that. That's the planning fallacy. This is the first thing that you're paralyzing yourself with. The second thing is that we're conditioned. So why is it so hard? Okay, so then like the answer to the planning fallacy is to iterate, right? So the right move is like you can't figure everything out from day zero. So you collect information over time and you course correct. So like you have to iterate. Like I'm going to try majoring in this, and I'm going to recognize that this may not be the right choice. And then I will adjust and adapt. But we can't do that, right? So then the question is like, why can't we just, like if I were to tell you, hey man, just adapt, iterate. You know, it's not going to be perfect first time around. You'll get there eventually. Why is that so hard for people to implement? Because it is, right? I can say that, but it's not like people are just going to do it. And that's because of our conditioning. So this is unfortunate, but society conditions us to be perfect and fast. So we're conditioned into thinking that society and life is a race, okay? So the interesting thing is that society doesn't actually reward competence. They reward speed to competence. Let me give you an example. So if let's say I'm in a class, like let's say I have a math class, okay? And the math class has 3 tests and a final. And let's say that the final, as a proper final exam, covers all of the material throughout the whole year. So it has every single thing that I've learned in the math class that gets tested in a final. That's why it's called a final exam. So the grading for the class is that the first test is worth 20%, the second test is worth 20%, the third test is worth 20%, that's 60%, final is worth 40%. Super normal situation. So let's say that I didn't understand anything in the first test, didn't understand anything in the second test, didn't understand anything in the third test. Something happened in my mind, I crammed, I learned all of the math that I'm supposed to, and I get 100% on the final, and I got zeros on the first 3 tests. Do I pass the class or do I fail the class? Even though I may know the most math out of everyone in the class, and I've mastered all the concepts of mathematics, even though I get 100% on the final, I still fail the class. And it's the kid who got 80% the whole way through that passes the class, right? So even though technically I know more mathematics than they do, I fail and they pass. So our system is designed for rapid progression to perfection. It's not about learning everything. It's about being impervious to making mistakes. Our society conditions us to not make mistakes and not iterate. It demands perfection from the get-go. How do you become valedictorian of your high school? Why do we care about valedictorians? Do valedictorians know the most? Maybe not. We have no idea. That's not what valedictorian measures. What valedictorian measures is who has been perfect from day one. Who has been the most perfect, the fastest, and most consistently. That's actually what life rewards. Or that's what society rewards, I should say, not life. So this is why valedictorians are more competitive to get into college, right? So once again, if you're at the top of your class in high school, then you get into a better college. If you get into a better college, then you're going to get a better job. If you get a better job, you're going to make more money. If you make more money, you're going to be more attractive to people to mate with. And then you'll end up having your choice and a better choice of who you end up marrying. And if you marry the right person, then you're going to have better kids. And now we see that since society has conditioned us this way, there's no room for mistakes. Why it's so damn paralyzing to not to make a choice. Because if you don't board that train, because that's what life is, right? It's a train. You board the fast train, you're on the fast track in life. It's a race, right? So, oh yeah, like I want my kid, so my parents wanted me to skip a grade, so I skipped a grade. And I was like, okay, fine. And then like I started school when I was young and then like sucked at sports. And then they want you to race through life as quickly as possible. Everyone wants to take AP classes in high school so they can graduate from college in 3 years. And now there's even abbreviated med schools that are 3 years instead of 4 in the US. So now at the age of 24, I can graduate from medical school. I can finish my training at the age of 28, right? Being a psychiatrist. Everyone thinks it's a little, and then what happens after 28? Like, what then? Then I've won. I've won the game of life. And I won at 28, which is better than winning at 40, obviously. Because then you start living at 28. It's like, wait a minute, hold on. What? So our society conditions us to be terrified of making the wrong choice. Absolutely terrified. Because it punishes us for making the wrong choice. And that punishment sits with us for the rest of our life, right? It's like once you get one F in a class, your GPA is forever ruined. There's no way to escape your mistake. And now we wonder, why are so many young people terrified of making the wrong choice. It's because they've grown up in a society that does not let them make mistakes. It doesn't matter what you actually end up understanding. So thankfully, medicine is a little bit different. Somewhere along the way, medicine realized, like in residency, you don't have grades. Just think about this. Residency is when you actually learn medicine. You no longer have grades. There's no grade. Residency is when you're taking care of heart attacks. You're learning how to take care of heart attacks. You're learning how to deal with narcissists. You're learning how to deal with addicts. You're learning how to deal with people who are, having asthma. Learning how to talk to pre-diabetics. This is when you're actually learning how to save lives. And there's no grades. Why? Because grades don't matter at that point. It's not about the grade. Grades are a way to measure against your colleagues. It's a way to differentiate human beings. It's an approximation of differentiation. It's a way for people who are reviewing applications to say this person is better than this person. That is the purpose of a grade. Once it actually comes to saving lives, no one cares. Do you guys know, think about your doctor. If y'all have a good doctor, do you know what their grades were? Do you care what their grades are? Does anyone care what their grades are? Does anyone care that they were valedictorian of their high school? No one cares, because at that point, there's a real world consequence. So we get paralyzed because we have been conditioned on a system that does not relate to reality. It doesn't really matter. And so now this is we see why you're so paralyzed, because you just because the consequences will live with you for the rest of your life. So let's look at this. Paralyzed by making fear of the wrong life choices, right? And then you don't even truly know what you want anymore, because you're so paralyzed by making the wrong choice, even if you knew what you wanted at some point. But then you were afraid it was the wrong choice. So then you started the process of convincing yourself that you didn't even want it. And then you're confused by what you want because you knew what you want, and then you killed it inside you because it was the wrong choice. And now you're confused. You're directionless. What do I do? I don't even know what I want. Yeah, that's because you took it out back and axed it. Because I fear that I might start something and end up not liking it, and there'll be no way to get out of it. Where do you think this attitude comes from? It comes from GPAs. Because if you make an F, that'll live with you for the rest of your life. If you fall behind in the race of life, if you're 23 and graduating from college, there's no way you will ever catch up to the 22-year-olds who graduated from college. Time is limited. The sand in the hourglass has run out, and you are screwed. Paralyzed with indecision. So what does Jnana Yoga say? Jnana Yoga says, first understand this, first and foremost. And then understand, is this actually true? So evaluate it for yourself. Is there a right decision or a wrong decision? Can I end up screwed in life? And the short answer is yes, you can. So then Jnana Yoga says, what are you going to do about it? Let us assume that it is possible that you can make the wrong choice, which I'm not even sure is correct, but Jnana Yoga will still say, so be it. This is a fact of life, that you could be screwed. You could make the wrong choice. Any building that you walk into could collapse on your head. It's possible. What are you going to do about it? Jnana Yoga will then ask you, how are we going to live in this world of uncertainty? And this is where, all the yogis, they get back to living in the present, right? So make the best choice you can today. Iterate. Recognize that's where iteration comes from. Iteration is making the best choice you can today. Recognizing that it may be the wrong choice. It may be a stupid choice, but you'll figure that out tomorrow, and then you're going to make the best choice you can tomorrow. And then over time, you will learn how to make the right choices, which I recognize is sort of a paradox because we're saying there isn't a right choice. But it's almost like a game of Texas Hold'em, right? Where you get your first two cards and you don't know what the flop is going to be. You don't know what the turn is going to be. You don't know what the river is going to be. So you make a bet based on the knowledge that you have. The flop shows up. Some cards show up. Oh my God. Boy, did I screw up. You adjust accordingly. Then the turn, then the river. And then you may win and you may lose. But the cool thing is that even though the poker players they can never see the future. They can never see the flop. They never do. And yet some people are good at poker and some people are bad at poker. How do poker players get good? They start to learn, okay, this is how much I should do here. This is how much I should do here. They learn how to live with uncertainty. They learn how to make probabilistic bets. And that's all you can do in life. That's what it means to live in the present moment. You're making a probabilistic bet. And this is why it's hard for people who are trying to make the right choice. People who trying to make the right choice are basically doing one of these video game runs with 1 HP. It's like 1 HP and you wipe. Their strategy is to be perfect from day one, right? It's 4.0 in high school, 4.0 in college, 4.0 in med school. That's their strategy, is the no-hit run, right? That's what they want to do. But that's not a very reliable strategy. What's far more reliable is to tank up and find some healing pots and then just take the damage and heal up and keep going. It's far more reliable. That is the iterative strategy. That is living in the present moment. So make the best decision that you can today. Recognize that there's no such thing as the right decision or the wrong decision. There's only the best decision you can make today. And then you may be paralyzed. You're like, oh my God, what is the best decision I make today? Oh my God, how do I know which one's best? Next thing Jnana Yoga tells you is there's no such thing as a best decision. Just make a decision. Make the one that feels the best to you right now. Right? That's what Jnana Yoga says. And then you're like, okay, but what if it goes wrong? And then Jnana Yoga says, then it goes wrong. And then you adjust tomorrow. But what if I'm screwed? Then you're screwed. You can't prevent being screwed. You can just try to not be screwed. That's the most that you can do. Now, one other thing to point out, okay, before we jump into the meditation. As a kid, I was easily overwhelmed and would often have this feeling of time running out. And then I would throw this tantrum because I felt trapped, as if the walls were closing in on me. Today, this feeling persists in my decision-making, though not as strongly. So, is there something that will help with this? So that's Jnana Yoga. Now we're going to go in a different direction, okay? This chat is what we call a samskar. So a samskar is a ball of undigested emotion that lives within us and activates at particular times and interferes with the function of our mind. So this person has this fear from a young age that prevents them from making decisions. Over time, what they've learned how to do is suppress that fear. They've kept it so their brain is developed enough to where they no longer throw a tantrum. But the core of the feeling is still there. So this is something, if you guys have watched Dr. K's guide and you've looked at the Vedic psychology thing, and you guys have watched Falling Behind, Fantasy Trap, or any of those other like depression videos, right? So these are the videos that explore the common like complexes that people will experience that lead to depression. So if y'all have watched that, you'll recognize this as a samskar. And this is the wild thing, is that as long as that samskar exists within your mind, you will continue to have this feeling. And if you truly want to be free of this, you have to digest that samskar. You have to go to the root of the fear. Why do you feel trapped? Your mind has learned that if you don't make the right decision, you're going to get trapped. It has learned that lesson. And so anytime you try to make a decision, there's a voice in your head that says, don't make that decision. We're not sure it's right. We don't want to be trapped. So even if you try to live in the present, there's something within your mind that says, no, 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 no. Living in the present is an idiotic idea. This whole living in the present thing, what if you screw up? Then we're going to have to live with it for the rest of our lives and we'll be trapped. There's a sensation of making a decision and becoming trapped by that decision. That comes from somewhere. That comes from a samskar. There's absolutely a process to discover and digest that samskar. It's much more complicated. We offer you an introduction in Dr. K's guide. The thing to understand is that samskar comes from an experience. And this is where, depending on, either you can find the experience or the yogis have hypothesized that it could come from a past life. So if you were born this way, there's still a samskar, right? Because there's a clear set of programming that activates in your mind almost like malware in a particular situation. Just because you cannot psychologically find the root of it in this life doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And this is where I don't even know how to explain this, but I just know it's true. That as a psychotherapist, I have done trauma processing work with people for things that have never happened to them. That is the best way I can describe it. So I've processed non-existing traumas for my patients, and it works wonderfully. Clinically, they improve drastically. So one interpretation of this is that there is something that is from a past life. I don't know I don't think it's evidence for that, by the way. So I think what's just as equally likely is that they had some kind of experience, like some kind of imaginary experience very young, like maybe they were 2 years old and they watched a movie, and that movie was so emotionally engaging, it essentially traumatized them. Maybe they just forgot the experience and can't recall it because memory isn't perfect. There are all kinds of things. A lot of people will jump to past lives and reincarnation. As a scientist, I don't think I can do that. I think what I would rather conclude is what I did, which is that processing traumas that did not ever happen to a person that they can recall seems to be clinically beneficial. That is the statement I'm happy to stand behind. So, could be a samskar from a past life. Who knows, right? That depends on your own worldview, what you choose to believe, what you choose to explore. And so at the end of the day, you have to deal with that root of, if I make the wrong decision, I will feel trapped. Where did you learn that? What does that mean for you? Be a jnana yogi and explore that. The last thing that I'll leave y'all with is a meditation of sorts. So one is you can do the path of Jnana Yoga. That's meditation number one, which is to ask yourself, what is a right decision and what is a wrong decision? Try to get as precise of an answer as you can. Don't give up. Give me the definition of a right decision or wrong decision. And how can I make the right decision or wrong decision? I want y'all to, anyone who comes up with a good answer, post it on the subreddit. If you think you have found the correct answer, post it. Let's see what the community can come up with. How do you know, how can you make the right decision and how can you make the wrong decision? That is the question. So that's an exercise of Jnana Yoga. The second thing, kind of out of left field. So I want you to close your eyes for a moment and say to yourself, I am that. Say it to yourself 3 times. I am that. I am that. I am that. So now what I want y'all to do is go ahead and open your eyes. And then anytime you are struggling with something, say to yourself, that is you. That thing that you are struggling with, I am that. So I know it sounds kind of weird. So if you're struggling with another person, say to yourself that I am that. That is a part of me. That human being is a part of who I am. I am that person. If you're struggling with making a decision, what major to use or to pick, I am that. I am choosing a major. Not like I am, not like the verb. I am the thing of choosing a major. That complex, that decision-making process, that is what I am. It's kind of weird. I want y'all to practice it for a while. It's a more advanced technique of meditation, but repeat to yourself, I am that. See the part of yourself in that external thing as best as you can. Start to realize that there's no difference between you and another person. There's no difference between you and a cup. And that comes from I am that. Okay? I am base. I am the software. Sure, start with the memes by all means. But try to really envision that. How can you be the software? How can you be truly based? Right? I am confusion. Perfect. Well done. I am anything that you observe outside of you. Recognize that you are that. If you want to be Ron Burgundy, next time you see Ron Burgundy, by all means, I am that. Okay? Now, who are we rating? Right? So if people are a little bit confused, let's think through this. So one person was saying, I am dumb. So be it. So can you identify with, I am idiocy personified? And your mind may say, yes, yes, I am idiocy personified. I can identify with that. Then what you should do is, if you can identify with that, notice the quality of identification, how you become one with that thing. And then you should be able to do it for genius. I am genius personified, right? Because if you can connect with that external quantity and you are one with the external quantity, you have learned the process of connection. And then you can do it with anything else. So be it. If it's easier for you to connect with dumbness, then connect with dumbness. Right? So then pay attention to how is it that I am willing, how is it that I am that? Even if you say, yeah, I'm idiocy personified. How did you do that? How did you become idiocy personified? Like, how did you, I am that? Like, how did you do that? That's huge. It's revolutionary. Then do it with something else. Okay? Okay, I need a small streamer, chat. Small streamer. Yeah, so Momentum Moriarty has it right? So Oppenheimer understood it in that moment. He wasn't quoting. Okay. The cannon oil, Nefrito. I want like tiny, the cannoli. Wait, is Nefrito around? Nefrito is not an English language streamer. Okay, Clumps. Tortilla MD. Aluco. All right, we're going to raid Aluco. Send some love to Aluco. And we'll see y'all on Friday, okay? Dude, Aluco has 7 viewers. Let's become one with Aluco's chat.